There is a God you have already met. You did not know it was him. Nobody ever does. He was the stranger on the road who pointed you the right way. He was the coin you found on the sidewalk on the day you needed one. He was the reason the dog did not bark. The reason the guard fell asleep. The reason the message arrived on time. The Greeks built more shrines to him than to almost any other god, and almost none of them were temples. They were stones, small square stones standing at crossroads, at property lines, at front doors, places where one thing ends and another thing begins. He was born in a cave at the edge of the world, to a mother who was hiding there. By noon on his first day of life, he had invented music. By nightfall, he had robbed the god of the sun. By the next morning, he was lying about it to the king of the universe. And the lie was so good that the king laughed out loud and eventually gave the baby a job. He carried messages for Olympus. He carried travelers across dangerous country. He carried a father through an army in the dark, and a stolen girl back up into the spring. And at the very end, when nothing more could be done for anyone, he was the one who carried the dead, walking beside them and talking the whole way, because he was the only god who knew the road down and the road back. Kairos, this is the entire story of Hermes, the thief, the messenger, the guide, the god who could cross every border in the world except the one between himself and a home. Get comfortable. Close your eyes if you want to. He works best in the dark anyway. The road is empty, and the moon is up. A man is walking it alone, which is a thing you did not do in ancient Greece if you could help it. He could not help it. He left the market town later than he meant to, the way people always leave later than they mean to. And now the light is gone, and home is still 2 valleys away. And every sound the countryside makes after dark is a sound designed for exactly this situation. He walks fast. He listens. The pines on the hillside move against each other in the wind, and the sound they make is the sound of something large deciding whether to be interested in him. It is only the wind. He knows it is only the wind. Knowing this helps him less than you would think. The Greeks were not embarrassed about this fear. They understood the night road as a real place, with real rules. There were wolves in the hills, and there were men in the hills who had chosen the hills over the law, and past a certain hour the road belonged to them, and you crossed it as a guest, quietly, hoping the hosts were sleeping. The man comes over a low rise and sees the crossroads, and at the crossroads, pale in the moonlight, stands the stone. It is a square pillar, about the height of his chest. On top of the pillar is a carved head, a bearded face, weathered by rain and wind until the features have gone soft. The face is smiling. That is worth noticing, because the gods of Greece did not smile much in stone. Zeus glowered. Athena stared through you toward the next war. This face, at the crossroads, wore a small, easy, roadside smile, and it had been wearing it for longer than the man had been alive, greeting everyone who came over that rise in the dark and felt what he is feeling right now, which is the specific relief of finding out you are not alone. At the base of the pillar there is a pile of small stones. Nobody organized this. No priest stands at this crossroads collecting offerings. No law requires what is about to happen. The man simply does what his father did, and what his father's father did. He bends down, picks a pebble out of the dust, and sets it on the pile. Then he walks on, and the road feels different now, and he could not tell you why, and he does not need to tell you why. That was the whole arrangement, and both sides understood it perfectly. A pebble in the dark. Safe passage. No question. Here is the part worth slowing down for. That pillar had a name. The Greeks called it a Hermes, and if you could rise up off that dark road like a night bird and look down at the whole country in the moonlight, you would see them everywhere. one at the next crossroads, and one at the crossroads after that, one at the boundary line between two farms, standing in the weeds at the exact place where one man's barley ended and another man's began, one beside the front door of nearly every house in Athens, so that you touched the god's head going out in the morning and touched it again, coming home at night. And nobody thought of this as religion, any more than you think of locking your door as religion. It was just what a door was for. They stood at the gates of cities. They stood at the entrances of markets, where money changed hands, and at the entrances of gymnasiums, where boys became men. They stood down in the harbors, at the waterline, at the place where the land gave out and the sea took over. Thousands of them, tens of thousands. Nobody ever counted, because nobody counts the things that are simply everywhere. Now hold that up against the others. Zeus had temples so large you could not get your arms around a single column, with a statue inside, plated in gold and ivory, ranked among the wonders of the world. Athena had a building on a hill in Athens that architects are still trying to equal. Apollo had Delphi, the navel of the earth, where kings stood in line, in the cold, before dawn. This god had a rock beside the road. And here is the strange arithmetic of it. More hands touched the Hermes than ever touched any temple in Greece. Farmers rubbed the carved head for luck on the way to market. Travelers left figs, olives, a splash of wine, a pebble. Children were lifted up on their father's shoulders to pat the smiling face. The grandest gods lived behind marble and were seen on festival days. From a distance, through smoke, this one stood out in the open weather at the edge of everything. At every seam in the world, where one thing turned into another thing, and ordinary people touched him every single day of their lives. The way you touch a doorframe on your way through it. The stories, when they bother to introduce him, give him a title, messenger of the gods. It sounds like a small part. Someone who runs in with a scroll, hands it over, and runs off again, while the important gods make the actual decisions. The stones tell it differently. The stones say that the Greeks looked at their whole world, and every place in it where they felt the ground shift under them. They put this god there, the property line, where neighbors become enemies over 3 feet of dirt. The city gate, where the stranger becomes a guest or a threat. The market, where a handshake turns a lie into a price. The front door, which is the border of everything a family has. The crossroads at night, and the last threshold of all, the one at the far edge of the living world. Because when a Greek died, this was the god who came for them. This god, personally, the smiling one from the roadside. Doors, roads, borders, bargains, luck, thieves, travelers, dreams, and the dead. Everything in between everything else. That was his territory, which is another way of saying he had no territory at all. The other gods ruled places. He had the gaps between the places. He was the god of the parts of the map that the map does not name. The man on the road is out of sight now, over the next rise, hurrying down toward a house where the fire is banked, and someone has left the door unbarred for him. He will sleep tonight. He will not think about the stone again for the rest of his life. And the stone does not mind. The stone stays at the crossroads, smiling in the dark, and the moon moves over it, the way the moon has always moved over it. And if you want to know how a god ends up out here, in the night wind, at the edge of things, while his relatives sleep in marble halls, then you have to leave this road. You have to go south, into the wild middle country of the Peloponnese, into a region called Arcadia, where the roads thin out and then give up entirely. You have to climb the tallest mountain there, and find the cave that opens in the side of it, and go back to a certain morning, a very long time ago, Because before the Crossroads, and before the winged Sandals, and before the 50 white cattle and the biggest laugh Olympus ever heard, there was a cave, and in the cave there was a cradle, and the cradle had a problem. Arcadia was the part of Greece that the rest of Greece told jokes about. It sat in the middle of the Peloponnese, ringed by mountains, and it had no coastline, no navy, no famous city, and no marble anything. What it had was rock, and pine forest, and high cold meadows, and considerably more sheep than people. The Athenians thought about Arcadians the way city people have thought about mountain people everywhere and always. Good folks, probably. Honest, probably. A little behind. You did not go there unless you had a reason, and almost nobody ever had a reason. The roads agreed. They ran wide and confident out of the port cities, and they narrowed as the country climbed. And somewhere in the Arcadian foothills they stopped pretending to be roads and became paths, and the paths became goat tracks, and the goat tracks gave out among the stones and did not apologize. That was where the map ended. Past the end of the map, the mountains kept going up. The tallest of them was called Silene. Snow stayed on its summit deep into spring. Pine forest climbed its shoulders and then gave up, the way the roads had given up lower down. And above the trees there was only rock and wind. And the wind coming over that summit had touched nothing but stone for a long time before it reached you. In the side of that mountain there was a cave. This was no shepherd's shelter, the kind of shallow scrape in a hillside where you wait out a storm with your animals steaming around you. This cave went deep. It went back and down into the body of the mountain, opening into chambers where daylight had never finished arriving, and the air inside was still and dry, and it held a warmth that had nothing to do with the sun. A goddess lived there. Her name was Maya, and her father was Atlas. Sit with that for a moment. Atlas, the Titan who stands at the western rim of the world and holds up the sky, the whole turning weight of the heavens on one set of shoulders, forever, with no putting it down, ever, because the one time he tried to hand it off is a famous story in itself. That was her father, and his daughters scattered out from under that weight into the world, and 7 of them rose into the night sky and became the Pleiades, the little cluster of stars that sailors have steered by for as long as there have been sailors. Maya was one of the 7. 6 sisters became stars. Maya chose a hole in a mountain. The old hymn that preserves this story gives her exactly one word of description. Shu. She kept away from the company of the gods. It says, away from the courts, away from the feasts, away from the endless glittering politics of Olympus. On clear nights she could stand at the mouth of her cave and look up and see her own sisters burning in the black sky over the pines. And then she could turn around and walk back into the dark, which is a thing you only do if the dark is giving you something. The sky refused. She had her reasons, and her reasons were probably excellent. Olympus in those days was a dangerous place to be beautiful. The king of the gods noticed beautiful. The queen of the gods noticed the king noticing. And what came after that never seemed to land on the king, and never seemed to land on the queen. It landed, every single time, with the full weight of heaven, on whoever had been noticed. So Maya arranged to live where noticing could not reach. She kept a fire in the outer chamber, and a loom, and wool. She had the sound of wind in the pines, and the small society of the mountain, owls and foxes, and the slow, patient tortoises that grazed the grass by the entrance. She had long nights and no visitors. You already know where this is going. Zeus found her. Zeus found everyone. That was very nearly the definition of him. The way light finds the gap in a shutter. The old hymn is quiet and careful about this part. And this story will be quiet and careful about it too. He came at night, in the deep hours when Hera slept, and he was gone before the light came back. That was the entire shape of it. Visits that existed only in the dark, in the space between one day and the next, in a cave between the map and the wilderness. Inside, a secret held between the two most powerful beings in the universe. Every single thing about this child was between. Maya carried him alone. No attendants came to the cave. No goddesses arrived with gifts. No announcement moved across the heavens. There was just a woman by a fire inside a mountain, growing larger as one season turned into the next, keeping the secret, because the secret was the whole arrangement and she had always been good at it. And on the fourth day of a certain month, Adam, the child was born. It is worth pausing here on how the other children of Zeus had arrived, because the difference is the point. Athena came out of the head of Zeus himself, in front of the entire assembly of heaven, fully grown and fully armored, with a war cry that rang off the mountains. Apollo was born on the island of Delos with goddesses standing in attendance, while sacred swans circled overhead, and the island itself, which had drifted loose and homeless its whole existence, put down roots into the floor of the sea in his honor and never moved again. Those were arrivals. Those were events. The universe stopped what it was doing and rearranged the furniture. For this birth, the audience was one exhausted mother and a fire that had burned down to red. No part of the world took any notice at all. The sun came up over Arcadia the way it came up every morning, and the light slid down the long shoulder of Selene, through the pines, and reached the mouth of the cave, and laid a tall rectangle of pale gold on the stone floor just inside the entrance, which is what it did every clear morning. And this morning was, as far as the sun knew, exactly like the others. Maya wrapped the baby in soft cloth and laid him in his cradle, a winnowing basket lined with wool, the kind of thing Arcadian farm wives used, because a cave at the edge of the map does not stock royal furniture. Then she slept. She had earned it several times over. The baby did not sleep. He lay in the basket in the warm half-dark, minutes old, and he was quiet, and his eyes were open. Newborns cannot really see. A few inches, blurry shapes, light against shadow. That is the whole visual world of a child on its first morning. And out of that blur, a newborn hunts for one thing only: faces. Every newborn that has ever been born searches for a face the way a compass needle searches for north. It is the first instinct, older than hunger. Find the face. Find the one who will keep you alive. Every human child does it. Every godchild, presumably, does it too. This one had turned his head the other way. He had turned toward the mouth of the cave, and he was looking at the rectangle of morning light on the stone floor, at the bright gap where the dark of the cave ended and the entire rest of the world began. As the sun climbed, the rectangle moved, thinning and stretching, sliding slowly across the stone, and the baby watched it move the way other babies watch their mothers. He was watching the door. Most newborns look for a face. This one had located the exit. He stayed that way all morning. Quiet. Patient. Outside. The pines moved in the wind. A bird crossed the mouth of the cave. One quick shadow through the gold, and his eyes tracked it. Into the light, and across it, and gone. Somewhere below him. Down the mountain. The goat tracks began. Somewhere past the goat tracks. The paths. And past the paths. The roads. And the roads ran down out of the hills and gathered themselves and went everywhere. Cities full of people. Harbors full of ships. Olympus with its thrones and its feasts and its enormous glittering family that did not know he existed yet. And beyond all of it, past the last stone, at the edge of the living world, the grey country where the dead walked, which even the roads were afraid of. The whole connected everything, every piece of it reachable, every piece of it starting from that one bright rectangle on the cave floor. 8 feet away, his mother slept. The fire settled and ticked. The morning wore on toward noon, the way mornings do. In no hurry, suspecting nothing. The cradle, as advertised, had a problem. The problem was lying in it with his eyes open, doing the math. He was 1 morning old, and he was already measuring the distance. Noon came to the mountain, and the baby made his move. He had been studying the side of the basket for some time. It was woven, which meant it had gaps, and gaps are handholds if you think about them correctly. And thinking about things correctly was going to be the entire story of his existence. Starting now, he got one small hand into the weave, then the other. He pulled himself up, wobbled, corrected the wobble, and got a leg over the rim with the concentration of a man robbing his first house. The basket tipped. He rode the tip instead of fighting it, rolled over the edge, and landed on the cave floor on his hands and feet, soundlessly, the way cats land. He held still and listened. His mother breathed in the inner chamber, slow and even. The fire ticked. Nobody had noticed anything, because there was nobody to notice, which is a condition he would spend a great deal of his life arranging on purpose. Then he stood up and walked. The first steps were a negotiation. Legs, a few hours old, have opinions, and the floor of a cave is not level. And he lurched and caught himself and lurched again. But something in him learned at a speed that had nothing to do with ours. By the 4th step, the lurch was gone. By the 10th step, he was walking the way water finds a path downhill, without visible effort, without a single wasted motion. And that walk, once he found it, never left him. Painters and poets would spend the next 3,000 years trying to catch it. The rectangle of light was waiting. He stopped at the edge of it, at the exact line on the stone where the dark of the cave ended and the day began. 1 bare foot in shadow. He looked at the line for a moment. The first border anyone had ever set in front of him. He stepped across it. The light hit him all at once. Warmth on his skin. Real warmth. Sun warmth. Nothing like the low red warmth of the fire. He screwed his eyes shut, stood there in the blaze, and started laughing. Then he opened his eyes and walked out of the mountain into the world. Take the world in the way he took it in. 1 sense at a time. Everything arriving for the very first time. The grass of the high meadow, dry and hot, crackling faintly in the sun, breathing a smell like baking bread out of the ground. The pines further down, and the resin smell riding up the slope on the wind. The wind itself, moving over his skin like a live thing. The gigantic blue of the sky, going up and up without a ceiling anywhere. So much bigger than a cave that it took a moment of standing still just to accept the size of it. Cicadas everywhere, sawing away. An entire orchestra with no conductor. He stood in the middle of all of it, a few hours old, turning slowly, absolutely delighted. And then, at the mouth of the cave, right at the threshold, moving through the grass at the speed of geology, there was the tortoise. It was an ordinary Greek mountain tortoise, and it was doing what tortoises do, which is proceed. It was chewing its way from one clump of grass to the next clump of grass on a schedule known only to itself, carrying its house on its back, bothering no one. The whole world had just been laid out in front of this child. Mountains, sky, forests, the roads running down toward everything. And what stopped him? What he crouched down in front of and studied with his chin on his knees, was the slowest animal in Arcadia. Anyone else on that mountain looked at a tortoise and saw a tortoise. A shepherd saw a thing to step over. A fox saw a lot of work for very little dinner. A farmer saw, at most, a pot scraper. That is what a tortoise was. And everyone who knew anything agreed. The baby crouched in the grass and saw something no one, mortal or god, had ever seen in the history of the world. He tapped the shell with one finger. It made a sound. Not much of one. A dull little knock. But the sound had a roundness to it. A hollowness. A suggestion. He tapped again and put his ear against the shell, listening the way a doctor listens to a chest. Somewhere inside that dome. The knock swelled and rolled and lasted longer than it should have. The shell was not just armor. The shell was a room, and sound behaved differently in rooms. The old hymn that tells this story has the baby greet the tortoise out loud, cheerfully, like a merchant spotting the deal of a lifetime coming through the door. Hello, lovely little creature. Where did you get that beautiful shell? You are going to be very useful to me. Then it says what he said next. And it is one of the strangest, coldest, most honest lines anywhere in Greek poetry. He tells the tortoise it will be better off dead. Alive. You are a small, slow animal that people step over. Dead. He tells it. You will sing very beautifully. And this story is not going to pretty that up, because the Greeks did not pretty it up, and because it tells you something true about him that you will need for everything that comes later. He was, from his first afternoon, a creature who saw what things could become, and the seeing came first, before sentiment, before permission, before anything. He carried the tortoise inside the way a boy carries a treasure, and what happened next happened quickly, and the tortoise's part in the story was over, and its immortality was just beginning. What followed? No one taught him. Hold that in place. Athena sprang into the world already knowing everything Athena would ever know. Apollo was music, the way the sun is light. Born that way. No apprenticeship required. This child had been alive since dawn. Nobody had shown him a single thing. There was no instrument anywhere on the mountain to copy, because what he was about to make had never existed. He worked at the mouth of the cave, in the good light, with the whole afternoon ahead of him. He cleaned out the shell and set it in the sun. He cut reeds from the spring below the meadow and fixed them through the shell as a frame. He stretched a piece of oxhide across the opening of the dome, drum tight, and the room inside the shell got a ceiling. He found the horns of a wild goat, bleached and curved, and set them into the frame like two arms reaching up, and fixed a bar across the top of them. Then came the part that made it more than a drum. Sheep gut, cleaned and twisted into cords, and each cord tied to the crossbar and run down the length of the thing and anchored below the oxhide. 7 of them, side by side. Why 7? Nobody knows. The hymn just says 7, the way you would report a fact of nature. 7 strings, tuned against each other. Musicians have been arguing about the perfect arrangement of 7 notes ever since, in every century, on every instrument. And every one of those arguments traces back up this mountain to a baby working in the grass with sheep gut and a dead tortoise, getting it right the first time, alone, before sunset, on the day he was born. He held the finished thing on his lap, turned it over, checked the tension on each string with his thumb, one at a time, tightening here, easing there, tuning an instrument that had never existed by matching it against a sound he could apparently already hear in his head. Then he struck the strings. The sound that came out of the shell rolled across the meadow, and the meadow changed. The cicadas stopped, all of them, all at once. The whole soaring orchestra, silent. The wind kept moving in the pines, but the sound of it seemed to step back, the way people step back to let something through. One note, hanging in the mountain air, round and bright and completely new. The universe had been running for a very long time, and it had thunder, and bird song, and wind, and the sea. It had never had this music that a mind had made on purpose, out of parts, because it wanted the sound to exist. The baby sat with the shell in his lap and listened to the note fade all the way down to nothing. Then he laughed and struck the strings again, and this time he sang with it. He made up the song on the spot, and the old hymn tells us, with a completely straight face, what the first song in the history of the world was about. It was about himself. It was about Zeus coming to a cave in the dark, and a shy goddess with beautiful hair, and their secret, and the birth of a remarkable and promising baby, meaning him, the first singer-songwriter in the universe, hours old, and his first subject was his own press release. He sang it the way young men sing brags outside taverns, joyfully, shamelessly, trying lines out, keeping the good ones, understand what the instrument meant in his hands. Though, underneath the joke of it, he had been alive for one day. Nobody on Olympus knew his name. He owned nothing except what he could make out of a mountainside, and the first thing he made, out of a shell and some guts and a hide, was the most beautiful sound in creation. Emperors would weep at that sound. Gods would trade kingdoms for it. It came out of garbage and patience, and one afternoon, and a way of looking at a tortoise. Anyone can be born with a gift. He built his outback with his hands. On day one, the sun went low, and the light over the meadow turned to gold, then to copper. The baby played until the stars of his aunts came out over the pines. Then he stopped and sat very still and thought, and the thinking had a new flavor to it, because the song had been fine. The lyre was wonderful, but the fire in the cave was down to embers again, and the evening meal was warm milk, and it had occurred to him, somewhere in the last verse, that he was a god, and that gods did not live like this. Gods had herds. Gods had gold and altars and smoke rising to them from 100 cities. His father had all of that. His brothers and sisters had all of that. Everything he was owed was piled up out there in the world, north of here, past the end of the goat tracks, and absolutely none of it was going to walk up this mountain and introduce itself. He set the lyre down in his cradle. He tucked the blanket around it, the way you would tuck in an infant, which, since he was not going to be using the cradle tonight, seemed a shame to waste. Then he stood at the mouth of the cave and looked north, into the falling dark, toward a place called Pieria, where the gods pastured their cattle. The lyre had taken him an afternoon. The night was still ahead of him, and the night had plans. The meadows of Pieria lay far to the north, below Mount Olympus itself, and they were the kind of pasture that does not occur in nature. The grass grew thick and sweet the whole year round. No wolf had ever crossed the boundary of that country. It was the home pasture of the gods, and grazing across it in the moonlight, white as sea foam, were the cattle of Apollo, 50 of them, broad-backed, crook-horned, moving slow through the silver grass with the total unconcern of animals that have never once been afraid. They were immortal cattle. They had eternity, and they grazed like it. At the edge of the meadow, standing in the shadow line where the trees stopped, was a baby. He had covered the distance from Arcadia in a single evening, which should have taken a grown man on a good horse the better part of a week. The hymn does not explain how and he never explained how, and getting places faster than anyone could account for was about to become a permanent feature of the world. He stood at the tree line with the moon on his face, a few hours older than he had been at dinner, watching the herd drift and dip its 50 white heads, and doing what he had done in the cradle that morning, measuring, understand what he was looking at, because he understood it perfectly. These were not just cows. They belonged to Apollo. And Apollo was not just anybody. Apollo was the biggest thing in the sky, short of Zeus himself. God of the sun, God of prophecy, God of the bow that never missed, older brother, favorite son, the pride of Olympus. Nobody stole from Apollo. The sentence barely made sense. It was like stealing from the daylight, which is exactly why it was the correct target. Follow the logic, because it is a one-day-old's logic and it is flawless. He did not want cattle. Particularly, he wanted to exist. He was a son of Zeus, born in a hole in the ground, unknown, unannounced, owed a seat at a table that did not know he was alive. A boy in that position can wait politely at the bottom of the mountain to be discovered, and wait forever. Or he can do something so outrageous to someone so important that the whole family has no choice but to convene and find out who he is. Fame or ruin, either one. Tonight, anything but the cave and the milk and the waiting. He crossed the moonlit grass and went to work. And what he did next stands as one of the strangest and most beautiful crimes on record. He cut 50 head out of the herd, and he drove them backward. Not backward, as in the wrong direction. Backward, as in reverse. He turned the animals around and walked them tail first, all the way off the sacred meadow, so that every hoof print pressed into the dust pointed north, while the herd itself flowed south. 50 cattle, walking in reverse, in the dark, in silence, guided by a baby. And the trail they left behind them told anyone who found it a simple, confident, upside-down lie. The tracks said a herd had arrived at this meadow. Nothing, said the tracks, had ever left. Then there was the problem of his own feet, and the solution to his own feet. And this may be the detail that tells you the most about him. His footprints would give the whole game away. Tiny bare feet, trotting alongside 50 reversed cattle. So he sat down in the grass by the shore at Pieria, and he wove himself sandals. Not shoes in any respectable sense. He plaited tamarisk twigs and myrtle branches into 2 great flat rafts of brush, and he lashed them to his feet, leaves and all. And when he walked, the brush wiped the dust behind him like a broom. What he left on the road was no footprint at all, just wide, soft, sweeping marks, as if 2 small clouds had come down and dragged themselves along the ground. An old man in a vineyard saw him. This was at Onchestus, in the hill country, deep in the night. The old man was out among his vines by moonlight, banking the earth around the roots, because old farmers sleep badly and vineyards always need something. And down the road past his fence came a parade that no amount of long life prepares a man for. 50 white cattle, glowing in the dark, all of them walking backward with the patient expression of animals who have decided not to ask questions. And behind them, herding them along with a switch, a babe, wearing what appeared to be 2 large bushes strapped to his feet. The baby stopped. He looked at the old man. The old man looked at the baby, and the baby, in the friendliest possible way, offered him some advice. The hymn preserves the shape of it. Old man digging your vines. You will have plenty of wine this year, as long as you remember one thing. You saw nothing, if anyone asks, and no one will ask. You did not see what you did not see. Your grapes will thank you for your bad memory. Then he clicked his tongue at the cattle, and the parade moved on. Backward, into the dark, leaving the old man alone with his vines, and the moonlight, and a decision to make about reality. The old man looked at the road for a while. Then he went back to banking his vines, having concluded, on reflection, that he had seen nothing, which was, after all, what the ground itself said. South through the night the herd went, tail first, over hills, along a riverbed, the baby sweeping along behind on his rafts of brush, and no dog barked anywhere, which was its own small miracle. Nobody would notice for days. He brought them at last to the river Alpheus, near a place with high grassy banks and a cave for hiding things in. And, by then, the sky, in the east, was thinking about turning grey. And he was, for the first time in his short life, hungry in the enormous way that a night of real work makes you hungry. What he did next is the strangest part of the whole night, and the part that gives the whole night away. He gathered wood. He invented, on the spot, a trick with a bay branch spun against a hollow block until it smoked and caught. And some say that was the first fire ever kindled by hands, that matches themselves trace back to this exact minute of this exact night. Then he took 2 of the 50 cattle, and this story will be as quick about it as he was. And they went from cattle to meat, and the meat went onto the fire, and the smell of roasting beef rolled out over the river Alpheus at dawn. And he divided the meat into 12 portions. Count with him, because he counted 12. He laid the meat out in 12 equal shares, 1 for each of the great gods. And he did it with the care of a priest at a festival. Everything correct. Everything, even. And any Greek hearing this story stopped right here, did the arithmetic, and smiled, because Olympus had Zeus, Hera, Poseidon, Demeter, Apollo, Artemis, Ares, Aphrodite, Hephaestus, Athena, and Hestia, 11 thrones, 11 great gods. The 12th portion was for somebody the world had not heard of yet. He was 1 day old, alone on a riverbank, wanted for cattle theft, and he was setting a place for himself at the table of heaven, not asking for the place, setting it, filing the paperwork with the universe directly, in smoke and roasted fat, sacrifice being the one language every god was required to answer. And then came the hard part, the part the old hymn dwells on, because the old poets knew exactly what it cost. The smell of that meat was glorious, and he was starving, and he was a god, and gods do not eat the sacrifice. The offering goes up in smoke to heaven. That is what makes it an offering, and that is what makes the one offering it a god instead of a hungry boy. He stood over 12 portions of the best-smelling food in creation, 1 day old, empty as a drum, and the hymn says the sweet savour tormented him. Immortal though he was, he did not touch it. He let the smoke carry all 12 shares up into the grey morning sky, his own share included. He was going to join Olympus as a god, or not at all. And gods went hungry, on principle. And so, that morning, on principle, did he? Then he burned the evidence, hooves and hides and all, threw his lovely brush sandals into the river, scattered the ashes, and headed home with the dawn coming up behind him. He came up Selene with the first light, and here the hymn gives us a picture so good that 3,000 years have not improved on it. He did not open the door of the cave. He did not need doors. And anyway, doors creak. He turned himself thin. The poem says, like a breath of autumn mist, and he poured himself through the keyhole. Then he crossed the floor without one sound, climbed into his cradle, pulled the blanket up to his chin with the lyre tucked under his arm, and lay there, being, to all appearances, a helpless, newborn baby. Adorable. innocent, and asleep. His mother was not fooled for 1 second. Maya had been awake. Mothers are always awake. She stood over the cradle and asked him, in the low voice mothers use when the neighbors must not hear, where exactly a newborn goes all night, and what exactly he was planning to bring down on this house. She called him a shameless schemer. She told him his father had made him to be a great worry to gods and men. And she meant it as a scolding, and history would file it under prophecy. The baby opened one eye, and he answered her, gently, reasonably, the way you would explain the family finances to someone you love. Mother, why do you talk to me as if I were an infant? He said he intended to take up whatever profession would feed them both best. He said he had no intention of sitting in a cave, unhonored and unpaid, while his own family lived on ambrosia up the road. He said that if his father would not hand him honor, he would go get honor himself, and he knew where it was kept. And then he said the quiet part, the mission statement, the sentence under everything he would ever do. I am going to be the prince of thieves. Then he closed his eye and went to sleep, genuinely this time, holding the lyre, 1 day old, with the whole thing in motion and nothing left to do but wait. Far to the north, the sky over Pieria was turning pink, and the sun god was about to count his cattle. The morning light came down on the meadows of Pieria, and the meadow was wrong. Apollo stood at the edge of it and felt the wrongness before he could name it. The grass had the right size and the right color and the right quality of early light moving across it. What it did not have was cattle. 50 white cattle graze loudly, in the way that large animals are loud, without meaning to be, tearing grass, breathing, shifting their weight. The meadow was silent, and the silence had a shape, and the shape was the shape of 50 missing cows. He was the god of prophecy. He could see the future of empires, and he stood over the tracks in the dust of the sacred meadow, the greatest mind on Olympus, completely defeated. Because the tracks came in, they did not go out. He walked the trail twice to be sure, 50 sets of hoof prints, arriving from the south, walking calmly into a meadow, and then, apparently, ascending bodily into heaven, cows and all, and alongside the hoof prints, something worse, wide, soft, sweeping marks, no toes, no heels, no animal he knew, and no animal anyone knew, as if 2 small clouds had come down in the night and dragged themselves along the road. He stood over those marks a long time, the sun god, reading the ground like a scroll, and the ground was written in a language 1 night old. There is a version of Apollo that never gets told enough, and it showed up now. He did not rage across the sky. He did not burn the countryside. He worked the problem. He went down the road the tracks had come from, backward along the lie, asking the country as he went, and the country gave him nothing until he reached the hill town of Onchestus, and a vineyard, and an old man banking earth around his vines. Apollo asked him about cattle. Now, this old man had made a solemn arrangement with reality the night before, and the arrangement was that he had seen nothing. But there is something about a tall stranger with gold hair and a voice like the middle of noon, looking at you with eyes that have seen every lie since the first one. The old man held out for as long as he could, which was roughly 1 sentence. Then he told Apollo everything, in a rush, gratefully, the way water leaves a cracked jar. He said he could not swear to it. He said his eyes were old, but he believed. He said that he had seen a baby driving cattle backward in the middle of the night, wearing bushes on its feet. Apollo stood in the vineyard and let that sentence arrive. Ababe, and a bird crossed the sky At that exact moment, an almond bird, on the wrong side of him, and the meaning landed in the way that knowing landed on Apollo. All at once and complete, he knew, with the certainty of the god of prophecy, exactly whose child had done this. There was a mountain in Arcadia. There was a cave he was not supposed to know about, holding a secret he was not supposed to know, because everyone on Olympus knew at least 3 secrets they were not supposed to know. Zeus had a new son, and the new son had been alive for 1 day, and he had already found Apollo's cattle, and taken them, and hidden them, and walked home. Apollo went south, like weather. He came down on Selene in the full light of morning, found the cave mouth, and filled it. That has to be seen from the inside to be understood. The cave had 1 door, and the door was made of daylight. And then it was made of Apollo. The god of the sun, in a doorway, is an eclipse in reverse. Light standing in the light, blazing, enormous. And inside the cave, everything shrank back from him. The shadows, the fire smoke, the hanging herbs, everything except one thing. In the cradle by the fire, wrapped to the chin in a blanket, lay a baby, deeply and beautifully asleep. It was a masterpiece of being asleep. The breathing was slow and even. The eyelids were soft. One small fist was curled against a tortoiseshell lyre, tucked under the blanket like a favorite toy. And the whole picture said one thing to any observer with a heart, and the thing it said was innocence. Hours old, dreaming of milk. Apollo looked at this arrangement for a moment. Then he went through the cave, like a customs inspection. The hymn says it plainly. He took his key and opened every recess. 3 inner chambers, cupboards of nectar and ambrosia, chests of Maya's silver and gold, clothing, stores, the whole modest treasury of a hidden goddess, and found not one hoof, not one hide, not one white hair of one cow. The cattle were 100 miles away in a cave by the river Alpheus, and the only evidence in this entire mountain was the small warm criminal in the basket, radiating sleep at him. So Apollo stood over the cradle and asked his question. He asked where his cattle were. He asked it the way the sun comes up, without negotiation, and he made a promise along with it, the kind of promise gods could actually keep. Tell me, child, or I will pick you up and throw you into Tartarus, into the black under the world, into the dark that is under the dark, and your mother and your father both will not bring you back from there. You will be king of the babies in the pit. The baby opened his eyes, and what happened next made the whole rest of his career, and you have to hear it the way Olympus would hear it that afternoon, retold, savored, line by line. The baby blinked up at the blazing god of truth and asked, in a small, polite voice, what a cattle was. He said this was a very unkind way to speak to an infant. He said he had been born yesterday, that his feet were soft, that the ground was rough. He said his interests, currently, were sleep, warm milk, and his blanket. In that order, he suggested, helpfully, that cows, whatever they were, sounded large, and that Apollo might look for something large, somewhere large, rather than in a cradle. He offered, in a spirit of cooperation, to swear a great oath on his father's head that he was not guilty, and furthermore had witnessed no theft of any cows, whatever cows might be, of which, he reminded the court, he had no knowledge, and the entire time he talked, his eyes were doing something that had nothing to do with the words. They were twinkling. The hymn actually records this. He lay there delivering the most sincere testimony ever heard in Greece, and he kept glancing sideways, and his eyebrows kept moving, and he whistled a little under his breath. The way you whistle past a thing you are pretending is not there. He was 1 day old, lying without a flicker to the God of truth himself. And he was doing it with an audience in mind. And the audience was not Apollo. Apollo laughed. He could not help it. And the laugh made him angrier. And the hymn says he called the child. Right then, in the middle of everything, the Prince of Thieves, handing him for free the exact title the baby had promised his mother he would earn. Then he reached into the cradle and picked up the entire situation. Baby, blanket, and all. And they went up to Olympus, to their father, to court. Picture the courtroom, because the baby was picturing it, and had been picturing it, in some sense, since yesterday morning. The great hall of Olympus, on the crown of the world, light from no particular direction, the assembled gods gathering in, because word had gone around that Apollo was coming up furious and carrying something, and nothing collected a crowd on Olympus faster than a member of the family in trouble. Thrones in a wide half-circle, and in the highest seat, with the storm resting quietly behind his eyes, the way weather rests over a mountain. Zeus, king of gods and men, father of everyone in the room. One way or another, Apollo set the cradle down in the middle of the floor. The baby stood up in it. And here is the thing the room could not have expected. He did not cry. He did not hide. A creature of 1 day, hauled before the most powerful assembly that existed or would ever exist. And he stood up in his basket, holding the rim, and looked around the hall slowly, at the columns, at the light, at the faces, like a young man measuring a room he intended to live in. Zeus asked Apollo to present the matter. Apollo presented it. The stolen-haired, the backward tracks, the swept footprints, the witness in the vineyard, the search of the cave. It was airtight. It was flawless. It was the God of truth prosecuting a 1-day-old. And every word of it was correct. And it did not matter at all, because then the defense rose to speak. The baby faced his father for the first time in his life, and he lied. He lied magnificently. He lied with his whole body, with tears in reserve, with small trembling hands, and he wove into the lies just enough truth to keep them standing, which is the actual craft of lying, and which nobody had taught him. Along with everything else, nobody had taught him. He said his brother was mighty and he was small. He said he was born yesterday, and Apollo knows it. And does this court believe that a newborn crossed half the world in a night? Driving cattle it had never seen. He said he respected the sun far too much to rob it. He said, and you could hear the tremble arrive on schedule, that he had nowhere else to turn. And so he appealed to the one protector every small creature is entitled to. Father, he said, I am your son too. Protect the younger. Silence in the hall of Olympus. And then Zeus, king of the universe, looked down at this baby, this yesterday's child standing in a basket, lying to his face with tears prepared, and eyebrows, innocent, having stolen 50 cows and swept his own tracks and set himself a place at the table of heaven, and knowing, the whole room could see, he knew, that his father saw through every word of it, and standing his ground anyway, with his chin up. Zeus threw back his head and laughed. Not a chuckle. The hymn says he laughed out loud, and the laugh of Zeus was weather. It rolled down the hall and out over the mountain, and the other gods caught it the way a dry field catches fire. And for a long moment, the entire government of the universe stood around a winnowing basket, roaring, and in the middle of the roar stood the baby, turning slowly, taking it in. Every face in the hall of heaven was pointed at him. The family that had not known he existed at breakfast could not look away from him by noon. He had been alive for 2 days. He had come from a cave at the edge of the map, and here he stood at the exact center of everything, held there by nothing but nerve. His father wiped his eyes and ordered the two brothers to settle it, and told the little one to lead the way to the cattle. And the hymn says, "The child obeyed," and Zeus's word was final. But the verdict was not the point, and everyone in that hall knew it, and the baby knew it best of all. The laugh was the point. You can refuse a request on Olympus. You can deny a claim, tabble a motion, ignore a prayer. Nobody can unlaugh. They came down from Olympus together, the sun god and the baby, which was already the strangest pair of travelers the roads of Greece had ever carried. And the baby led the way. South and west they went, to the river Alpheus, to the high grassy banks and the hidden cave. And the baby walked ahead the whole way with the cheerful confidence of a landowner giving a tour. Here was the ford. Here was the meadow. And here, driven out of the cave into the sunlight, breathing and enormous and real, were the cattle, white as sea foam, entirely unbothered, chewing Arcadian grass now instead of the grass of heaven, and finding it, apparently, fine. Apollo counted them. He counted them the way you count when you already know. Slowly, twice, 48. He turned to ask a question, and the answer was already waiting, because the answer had been rehearsed. The baby explained about the sacrifice. 2 cattle, 12 portions, every share equal, every right correct, all of it sent up in smoke to the 12 great gods. And Apollo, who was extremely good at arithmetic, went quiet for a moment at that number, the same way you just did. A few minutes ago, hearing it the first time, 11 thrones on Olympus, 12 portions on the fire. The child had sacrificed part of the crime to the gods, as a god, with a place set for himself, and had gone hungry beside the smoke on principle. Apollo looked at this person, 2 days old, standing in the river grass beside the stolen herd. And the hymn lets us see exactly what moved through him, because what moved through him was fear. He said it out loud. He said, "Child, the strength in you is going to be a problem." He looked at a baby and saw, correctly, a future running out ahead of them both, full of locked doors that would not stay locked, and it unsettled the god of prophecy more than any prophecy had. So he decided to solve the problem permanently. He cut strong bands of willow and moved to tie the child where he stood. And this next picture is one of the oldest jokes in Greek religion. The willow bands would not hold. They fell away from the baby's hands and took root where they fell, and grew, and twined, and in a few impossible moments the entire riverbank was a thicket of young willows, spreading, arching, weaving themselves gently over the backs of all 48 cattle like a green net over the whole herd, holding nothing, binding no one, blooming. Apollo stood in the middle of the thicket he had somehow planted. The baby watched him with an expression of deep sympathy. You cannot tie down the god of escape. The universe had just demonstrated this, botanically, in front of witnesses, and the demonstration held for all time. No rope, no cell, no border, no rule would ever hold this child, and the willows were the paperwork, and it was there, standing in the blooming wreckage of his own arrest attempt, surrounded by his own stolen cows, that Apollo heard the sound. The baby had sat down on a rock, and from somewhere inside the blanket he had carried all the way from the cradle. He brought out the tortoise. He settled the shell against his small body, and took the 7 strings in hands 2 days old, and struck them, and began, softly, to play. Now the meadow went quiet for the second time in this story. But this time, the audience mattered. The cattle stopped chewing. The river seemed to move with more care. And Apollo, the lord of music, the owner of the very idea of music, patron of every singer who would ever live, stood absolutely still in the willow grove, because he had never heard music before. Sit with how strange that is. He was the god of music the way he was the god of light. Natively, from birth, by definition, he knew music as mathematics, as the architecture of the universe, as the humming of the spheres. He knew it from above. He had never in his existence stood in a field while a made thing under someone's hands sent sound out into the air, and felt the sound arrive in his chest and move something in there that mathematics had never once located. The baby played and watched him over the shell and sung. He sang. This time, not about himself. He had read the room, which was his deepest gift and would be forever. He sang about the gods, the whole family, each in order of age and honor, how each came into being, who begot whom, who held what domain, the entire genealogy of heaven set to 7 strings. And it was, on top of everything else, flattery of the most exquisite kind, because it was a song that placed everyone correctly, and Apollo very near the top. When it ended, the last note went out over the river and faded the way the first note on the mountain had faded, all the way down to nothing, and nobody moved. Then Apollo said the thing that gods do not say. The hymn holds his exact astonishment. He said this was worth 50 cattle. He said, slaughterer of oxen, trickster, little schemer, where did this come from? He said no one on Olympus, no muse, nor god, no mortal at any feast had ever made a sound that did this, and that it opened 3 roads at once, to joy, and to love, and to sweet sleep. The god of music had been ambushed by music, on a riverbank, by a 2-day-old, and he surrendered to it in full view of the cows. And the baby watched all of this happen on his brother's face, and understood exactly what he was holding. Understand it with him, because this was the fork in his whole existence, and he saw both roads with total clarity. He was holding the one object in creation that the second most powerful god alive desperately wanted. He could bargain now. He could squeeze. He could set the price at anything. Cattle, titles, thrones, and Apollo, in this state, would likely pay it, and resent it, and remember it, and the resentment would sit between them for 10,000 years, the way resentments sat between gods. Forever. Load-bearing. That was door number 1, and it was the door any thief would take. He took the other one. He stood up off the rock, crossed the grass, and put the lyre into Apollo's hands. A gift. No price named. He showed him where the fingers went, guided the first chord, gave away in one motion the most valuable thing he had ever made or would ever make, and the hymn wraps the whole exchange inside one warm gesture. Apollo laughing, delighted, placing his own gleaming whip into the child's hand in return, and with it the keeping of the herds. The cattle stayed with the baby. The lyre went home with the sun. Trace what actually changed hands on that riverbank, because it is the founding transaction of everything he would ever be. The lie had gotten him noticed. The theft had gotten him to Olympus. But the gift did what neither could do. The gift turned the plaintiff into a brother. Apollo swore it on the spot, an oath of perfect friendship, that he would love no immortal more than this child. And he sealed it with a promise and a staff, a rod of gold, 3-branched, the famous one, the one this story will follow for the rest of its length. And he heaped on offices to go with it. Keeper of herds, lord of exchange. And the child took the staff, and the two of them walked back north together through the evening. Two brothers on a road, one carrying a lyre he could not stop touching, one carrying a golden staff nearly as tall as himself, and 48 white cattle walking ahead of them into the dusk. Forward, this time, the ordinary way, because there was no longer anything to hide. 50 cattle had come south in secret in one night. Everything that mattered went back north in the open. In an afternoon, somewhere on that road, Apollo tried one last time to hold on to the anger the situation had technically earned him. It was getting harder to hold on to. By the foot of Olympus, it was gone entirely, and it never came back. Not once, not ever. Across all the wars and feuds and 10,000 years of family politics that were coming, of all the bonds on that quarrelsome mountain, this one held the god of truth and the god of lies, the archer and the pickpocket, the firstborn glory of heaven and the afterthought from the cave, walking home side by side at dusk behind a herd of cows. Neither of them ever told the story the same way afterward. Both of them were telling the truth. Olympus had a problem, and the problem was the commute. Nobody talks about this part of running a universe, but somebody had to do it, and for a long age nobody wanted to. The gods of Greece were, whatever else you can say about them, homebodies. Each of them had carved out a territory, and each of them sat in the middle of that territory like a spider in a web, feeling for trembles. Poseidon had the sea and stayed in it. Hades had the dead and never came up. Not for weddings, not for wars, not for anything. Hestia literally was the act of staying home, the fire in the hearth, the goddess of never going anywhere. And she was considered very wise. Zeus ruled everything and visited nothing, because kings summon, they do not call on you. And yet the whole operation ran on messages. Heaven had verdicts that needed carrying. Kings needed warning. Armies needed omens. Lovers needed dreams. And the dead needed collecting. And all of it required something the gods of the fixed thrones did not have and did not want. It required somebody who would actually go down the mountain, over the water, into the smoke of the cities, out past the edge of the polite world and back, day after day, forever. Zeus had been watching his newest son for exactly this. Consider the resume from the king's point of view. Here was a child who had crossed half of Greece in one night, at the age of 1 day. For fun, who could pour himself through a keyhole, who could talk an old man out of his own memory, and lie to the god of truth with a straight face, and turn a courtroom into a comedy, and walk out of it with a brother instead of a sentence. Every quality that made him a criminal made him a courier. The talent was identical. It only needed pointing in a direction. And there was one more qualification, the deepest one, and it is the quiet hinge of this whole story. Every other god was anchored. Give the sea god a message for the underworld, and you would wait an eternity. Because the sea does not like leaving the sea. But this boy had come from a cave on the edge of the map. He held no territory. He sat in the middle of no web. There was no place in the universe he could not leave in a heartbeat, because there was no place in the universe that was his. His whole life. That fact would be the wound. On the day Zeus summoned him, it got a different name. It got called a job. The summons came, and the boy stood before the throne of his father, in the same hall where he had stood in a basket and lied for his life. And Zeus looked down at him and made it official. The hymn and the old poets give the shape of the appointment. He would be the messenger of the deathless gods. His word would carry his father's weight. He would have the roads, all of them, and the travelers on them. He would carry heaven's business to men. and men's prayers back up the mountain. And there was one more route on the map, the one nobody would say out loud just yet. The road that went down. That one would come later. It was always going to be his. Then they brought out the gear. And this part deserves to go slowly, because these objects were about to become some of the most famous objects in the world. 3,000 years later, people who cannot name 3 Greek gods can still describe this uniform. First, the sandals, golden, the poets say, and immortal. And on them, small wings. Understand, these were not decoration. The wings were alive, the way a bird is alive. They stirred on their own, flexed and settled, ruffled in a wind nobody else could feel. And when he laced the straps and stood in them for the first time, the sandals did not wait for instructions. They knew their business. The old formula says they carried him over water and over the boundless earth with the breath of the wind, which is the poets telling you, politely, that nothing alive or divine was faster. That distance itself had just become his native country. Second, the hat. And the hat matters more than it looks. It was a petassos, a soft traveller's hat with a wide brim, and it was the single most ordinary object anyone had ever seen on Olympus. Farmers wore it against the sun. Mule drivers wore it against the rain. It was the hat of the dusty road, the hat of the working man. And here it was being issued to a prince of heaven as his crown. Athena got a war helmet. Apollo got a wreath of laurel and gold. The new god got the hat your feet hurt in, and he wore it forever. And it fit the truth of him better than any diadem could have. His kingdom was the road. He dressed for his kingdom. And third, the staff, the golden rod Apollo had pressed into his hands on the riverbank. 3-branched, warm from his brother's grip, the Kerykeion. The Greeks would call it the herald's staff, and in time the whole world would know its silhouette. The most famous story of how it took its final shape is small and perfect. Walking in Arcadia one day, he came upon 2 snakes locked together in combat, striking and coiling, a knot of pure hostility in the middle of the path. And he did the most characteristic thing he would ever do. He did not take a side. He put the staff down between them, and the 2 snakes, feeling something move through the gold, stopped fighting and climbed the rod together, twining around it in opposite spirals, face to face at the top, frozen forever exactly, at the moment their war turned into a balance. That became the emblem. 2 enemies, 1 staff, holding still. He carried the end of every argument in his fist, and every border he ever crossed. He crossed carrying a picture of peace. Sandals, hat, staff, a courier, a traveller, a negotiator. That was the whole uniform, and he never changed it. Then came the first flight, and the first flight deserves its moment, because nobody before him had ever seen the world this way. He stepped off the edge of Olympus into open air, and the sandals caught him the way water catches a diver, and the mountain fell away underneath, up through the last ceiling of cloud, into the hard, clean light, and then out, southward, with the wind of his own speed roaring past the brim of the ridiculous hat, and the whole of Greece unrolled below him like a map that somebody had, at last, finished drawing. He could see everything. The bays cut into the coastline like bite marks, the islands scattered on a sea hammered flat and bright by the sun, smoke standing up from 100 towns, straight in the morning stillness, each column a household, a fire, a family, a pot of something cooking, and stitched across all of it, thin and pale, running valley to valley, ford to ford, gate to gate. He saw the roads. His brother drove across this same sky every single day and looked down at those same roads. And from the chariot they looked like lines on an old man's hand, something to be read from a height. That was the whole difference between the brothers, visible from the air. Apollo saw the pattern. He banked and dropped and wanted the dust. He came down low, low enough to startle goats, and ran the line of a road with his shadow flickering along the stones, over a ford where a woman balanced a water jar, over 2 mule carts stopped nose to nose while their drivers argued about the right of way, over a boy walking somewhere with bread under his arm. His people. He knew it instantly, the way you know your own language in a crowd of foreign ones. Everyone down there was in between somewhere and somewhere else, carrying something, hoping the road would be kind. The god of the space between had found his congregation, and it was everybody, on the best and worst days of their lives, the days they went somewhere. That night he did not sleep on Olympus. He had a seat up there now, a place at the table he had set for himself, with 2 stolen cows and a fire on a riverbank. The gates stood open to him. The feast was endless, and he took his dinner to go, the first god in history to do such a thing, and came down through the dark to a crossroads in the hill country, and sat on a boundary stone under the enormous wheeling stars, eating, watching the empty roads shine faintly in the starlight, perfectly happy. 60 generations of sculptors would put wings on his heels. Not one of them ever managed to carve him a throne. There was nothing to work from. The first real assignment was not a message. It should have been a new courier should get a scroll and a destination. Something ceremonial. A birth announcement between palaces. Instead, the king of the gods came to his newest son quietly, off to the side, in the way powerful men come to you when the thing they need does not go on the official record. There was a problem down in the hills of Argos. The problem had 100 eyes, and everything about it was Zeus's fault, which was, the boy was learning how most problems on Olympus began. Her name was Io, and her story is quick and terrible. So this telling will be quick and gentle. She had been a young priestess in the city of Argos, and Zeus had noticed her. And the noticing went the way it always went. What made her story different was the ending. Hera came looking, as Hera always came looking, and old Zeus, caught in the open field with the girl, panicked, and did the fastest thing a god can do. He changed her. One moment, a young woman was standing in the grass. The next moment, there was only a white cow, wide-eyed, lovely as cows go, and inside the cow, trapped and awake and understanding everything, was Io. Hera, arriving on the scene, looked at her husband, standing alone in a field next to the single most beautiful cow that had ever existed, and Zeus explained that the cow had simply always been there. And Hera said, in that case, surely he would not mind giving her the cow as a present. He could not refuse. Refusing was confessing. He handed his wife the girl, and Hera took her prize and chained her to an olive tree in a sacred grove, and set a guard over her. And the guard is the reason this chapter exists. His name was Argus, and he was old, older than the Olympians, one of the giant things left over from the world's first drafts. He was huge, and tireless, and utterly loyal to Hera, and his body, from his scalp to his heels, was covered in eyes, 100 of them. The poets settled on, though nobody who saw him was ever calm enough to count. Eyes on his face, eyes on his arms, eyes down his back like a river of watching, and they worked in shifts. When 50 closed, 50 opened. There was no angle of approach he did not cover, and no hour of the night he did not own. He never slept, because he was never entirely awake and never entirely asleep, and both halves of him were always on duty. Hera had solved guarding forever. You cannot sneak past everything that looks everywhere always. And so, the white cow stood chained to the olive tree. Month after month. By day she grazed at the end of her tether. By night she lay in the grass with a girl's mind behind her big animal eyes. Remembering hands. Remembering speech. And the 100 eyes watched her, without blinking. All of them. Ever. At once. Zeus could not bear it, and could not be seen to fix it. So he sent the boy. Look at the assignment honestly. Because the boy looked at it honestly. Kill Argus was the mission. But you cannot kill what you cannot approach. And you cannot approach 100 eyes. Force was useless. And stealth was worse than useless. Stealth was the exact thing Argus existed to defeat. Every gift the young god had. The speed. The keyhole trick. The silence. All of it was designed to beat watchers. And this watcher could not be beaten. And somewhere in the hills of Argos, the finest sneak in the universe sat on a rock and thought his way, slowly, toward the strangest solution in Greek myth. You cannot get past a guard who is all eyes, so you do not go past him. You go straight at him, in the open, in broad daylight, and you make him glad you came. What Argus saw, one warm afternoon, was a goatherd coming up the valley, a young man in a dusty traveller's hat, unhurried, driving a few goats ahead of him, and playing, as he walked, a set of pipes cut from river reeds. Nothing about him hid, nothing about him hurried. He came up the slope, in plain view of all 100 eyes, nodded pleasantly to the giant, in whose experience nobody had ever once been pleased to see him, and sat himself down on a rock a polite distance away, and went on playing. The music was good. It was simple and looping and warm, the kind of tune that sounds like it has always existed. And the giant, 100 eyes deep in the boredom of 1,000 identical days, listened. The goatherd played one tune, and then another, and between tunes he talked. Nothing sharp, nothing probing. Where the good springs were, how the summer was running, the gossip of the valleys, told slow. And Argus, who had spent his whole endless watch being feared and avoided, discovered that the afternoon was passing sweetly, and asked the young man to stay a while. That evening, the goatherd told stories. Understand what happened on that hillside, because it is the whole chapter, and in a way, it is the whole night you are having right now. The young god settled his back against a stone, with the chained white cow watching him over the giant's shoulder, and he began to talk, in a voice that was low, and even, and endless. He told how his own pipes came to be, a long story with a sad nymph in it, and a river, and a bed of reeds. He told the roads. He told origins of things, where fire came from, why the crow is black, one tail flowing into the next with no seam anywhere, no rise to grip you, no cliff to startle you awake, just the warm current of a voice that went on, the way a river goes on. And the 100 eyes began to close, not the way they closed in shifts, 50 down, 50 up, the arithmetic that had made him unbeatable forever. They closed the way a house full of lamps goes dark at bedtime. One here, then one there, then 3 along the great shoulders, then a whole constellation down the ribs, each eyelid sliding shut, slow and sweet, while the voice poured on through the dark, unhurried, promising nothing but the next quiet sentence. 70 eyes, 90. The giant's huge head began to nod. 929. If the shape of that scene feels familiar to you, lying where you are lying, listening to what you are listening to, then you have understood it perfectly. It is the oldest trick there is. A calm voice, an endless story, and every eye in the audience going down one by one. You are inside this trick right now. The only difference between you and the giant is how the story ends, and yours ends safely, and you can let go whenever you like. His did not. The 100th eye closed, and the boy stopped talking, and stood, and did the fast, quiet thing he had been built since birth to do, and did it once, and it was over before any part of the giant could wake any other part. The old poets did not linger there, and neither will this story. He was called Argifontes afterward, killer of Argus, and the name went ahead of him for the rest of time, fixed in the poems, hung on him in the first line of every hymn, his first honor, and it named the worst hour of his young life. He freed the white cow and sent her running, and her road home was long and hard and ended, at last, in Egypt, where Zeus gave her back her hands, her voice, her shape, herself. Hera gathered up the 100 eyes of her faithful servant. She would not let them rot in a hillside. She set them, every one, into the tail feathers of her favorite bird, and that is why the peacock, to this day, fans out 100 staring eyes behind it wherever it walks, a monument that struts. Every peacock on earth is a funeral going by. The young god flew home that night and did not play the pipes for a long time afterward. He had learned his own strength, and it had frightened him the way it had frightened Apollo on the riverbank. His voice could open any door, charm any guard, close any eye in the world. Once, he had used it as a blade. He never did again. Through every war and feud and errand of the 10,000 years ahead, with every power of heaven at his back and provocation beyond counting, the record stands. The gentlest weapon ever forged was drawn exactly one time. Though it is worth remembering, as you drift, who is telling you this, and how quiet the voice is, and how many of your eyes are already closed. Sleep is not what he does to you. Sleep is what he guards. Follow him through one working day, because the days were the job, and the job was about to teach him something nobody warns messengers about. Dawn, and he drops out of a pink sky onto the terrace of a palace by the sea, where a king who has prayed for 20 years to the god of a certain island is about to learn that the prayer has been heard, and that the answer is yes, and the old man will fall on his knees on the cold stone and weep into his beard, while the young god stands there in his traveller's hat, holding the moment, watching a human being receive the best sentence of his life. Mid-morning, a farmhouse in the hills, a dream to deliver that evening. Instructions from Demeter about a field that must lie fallow. No one. A battlefield camp, where 2 armies are drawn up and waiting, and he walks between them carrying the word that heaven wants a truce. And 40,000 men who were about to die this afternoon will now instead eat lunch, complain about the heat, and go home in the fall to their olive trees. And not one of them will ever know the shape of the day they almost had. Afternoon, a queen. Evening, an oracle. Night, a dying man's bedside in a fishing village. But that route belongs to a later chapter, and everywhere he lands, the same thing happens, and it took him years to see it, because it happened underneath the errands. Wherever he comes down, everything stops. Kings rise off their thrones. Generals go quiet in mid-sentence. The room turns toward him the way grass turns toward wind, because nobody, God or mortal, can look away from a person who has walked in carrying their future. Here is the thing about messengers that the thrones of the world have never liked to think about. The king commands, and believes he holds the power, and in a certain narrow way he does. But the message leaves the king, and from that moment until it arrives, the message exists in exactly one place in the universe, and that place is the messenger, the verdict that will topple the city, the pardon that will stop the axe, the answer, yes or no, that a girl on an island has been sick over for a month, for the whole length of the road. All of it lives in one carried satchel, behind one pair of quick eyes, and the man who owns those eyes knows the ending of stories that the people living inside them are still praying about. He knew before anyone. That was the strange tax the job collected. He knew the war was over while the soldiers were still sharpening spears. He knew the child would live while the mother was still bargaining with heaven. He landed in the middle of lives at their absolute hinge, opened his hand, changed everything, and left before the crying started, whichever kind of crying it was going to be. Power was not the word for what he had. Zeus had power. What the messenger had was worse. And lone Lear. He had foreknowledge without authorship. Every ending arrived in his hands first, and not one of those endings was his to change. And he began, in these years, to understand the price of the ticket. He lived one step ahead of the whole world, permanently, and one step ahead is a strange address. Nobody lives there but you. He was young, though, and fast, and the roads were sweet, and for a long time the work stayed light in his hands. Then came the errand to the mountain, and the work got heavy, and stayed that way, far in the east, past the civilized world, past the last of the roads he loved. The Caucasus Mountains stand against the sky like the wall at the end of the earth, and on the highest cliff of that wall, in the wind and the sleet, a god was nailed. His name was Prometheus, and every listener knows some version of what he did. When mankind was new and shivering, huddled in caves, eating raw meat in the dark, Prometheus looked at them and could not bear it. And he went up to heaven, and he stole fire, and he carried it down inside a hollow reed and put it into human hands. Warmth, light, cooked food, worked metal, the whole ladder upward. Every candle that has ever been lit descends from that one act of theft. And Zeus chained him to the cliff for it, drove the shackles into the rock, adamantine, unbreakable, and set an eagle on him. And the eagle came every day, and what the eagle did to him healed every night so that it could be done again. And this was to be the arrangement forever, not punishment as a sentence, punishment as a climate. Now stop and look at who Olympus chose to send to that cliff with its message, because the choosing is either very cruel or very blind, and it is genuinely hard to say which. They sent the patron god of thieves to deliver terms to a thief, and more than that, the boy who was sent had, himself, once stolen from the gods and been forgiven for it. 50 head of cattle, taken from heaven's own pasture, and it had ended in laughter, in a brotherhood, in a job and a staff and a seat at the table, because the boy had stolen for himself. And gods understand ambition. Prometheus had stolen for somebody else. He had taken one armful of heaven's property and given it away, to the weakest creatures alive, out of something the Greeks did not have a comfortable word for. And for that theft there was no laughter anywhere, and no forgiveness scheduled, ever. The messenger flew east with the terms in his satchel, and the terms were simple. Prometheus held one secret, a piece of the future, a name that mattered to Zeus's survival. Surrender the secret, and the mountain could end. Keep it, and the eagle keeps its appointment until the end of time. He came down through the freezing wind onto the cliff face, and stood on the air in front of the chained god. and it was the strangest audience of his young life. The thief of fire was a ruin, and was not broken. And he looked at the boy in the traveller's hat with something ancient and amused, moving behind the pane. Because Prometheus could see the future. It was his gift and his curse. And whatever he saw when he looked at this particular visitor, he greeted him with words that stuck. "Here comes the errand boy," he said, "the lackey of the new king. Run back, little servant, and tell him no." The old plays give Prometheus long, glorious speeches on that cliff. Defiance rolled out like thunder, and they give the messenger the thankless lines, the threats, the official position of heaven, delivered on behalf of a father who was not standing in the sleet to deliver them himself. The boy said what he had been sent to say. He said it correctly and completely. The eagle turned in the grey sky overhead like a clock that only told 1 hour, and the chained god refused the terms, and chose the mountain. And the messenger stood there a moment longer than the errand required, looking at a thief who would not deal, which was a thing his entire existence had not prepared him to see. Everyone dealt. Dealing was the world. Here was someone holding a card that could buy him out of endless agony, and he would not put it on the table. And the refusal was the whole of him, and it was magnificent, and there was nothing in the satchel to answer it with. The messenger flew home into the west with the wind behind him, and the message delivered, and the mission, by every official measure, complete. He did not go to Olympus that night. He went to a peak in Thrace somewhere, and sat in the dark above the sleeping country, and turned the day over, and could not put it down. He was the mouth of heaven. The mouth does not choose the words. Nobody had asked him what he thought of the words, because nobody ever asks the messenger that. In the whole history of messages, nobody has ever once asked the messenger that, and until today, the not asking had felt like lightness, like freedom, like the best part of the job. Tonight it felt like the fine print, somewhere east, on the wall at the end of the world. A god who had given away fire was keeping warm on pure defiance, and the young god of the roads sat with his golden staff across his knees, the staff with the 2 snakes holding their eternal truce, and understood, for the first time and forever, that some messages weigh more than the one who carries them, and you carry them anyway. And that is the job under the job. He was in the air again before sunrise. He was always in the air again before sunrise. But he flew east less often after that. And in 10,000 years he never once flew over the Caucasus for pleasure. And if you had asked him why, he would have smiled and changed the subject. And you would not have noticed the subject changing, because making you not notice was the thing he did best of all. Come back down to earth now, all the way down, past the palaces, past the temples, down to the dust of an ordinary road in an ordinary year, because this chapter does not happen on Olympus. This chapter happens at ground level, where his real congregation lived, and it begins with a question that sounds simple. Why did the Greeks put his face at the exact places where they were most afraid? Walk any road in that country and you would meet the Hermes, the square stone pillars with the carved, smiling head. And once you start mapping where they stood, a pattern comes up out of the ground. They stood at crossroads, at city gates, at the boundary stones between farms, at front doors, at harbour edges, at the mouths of markets. Every single one of those places is a seam, a spot where one world touches another world, and every single one of them made the ancient stomach tighten, because seams are where things go wrong. The crossroads is where the traveller picks wrong and meets the wolf. The boundary line is where 2 neighbours, good men both, reasonable men both, will end up screaming over 3 feet of barley, and one of them will come back at night with a knife. And everyone knows a story like that. The gate is where the stranger enters, and the stranger is either the best news of the month or the end of everything. And you get about 4 seconds to decide which. The door is the skin of the family. The market is a room full of strangers agreeing to trust each other, which, if you think about it too long, is madness. The Greeks thought about it exactly long enough, and then they posted a god at every seam, and they chose the only god who was native there. The others ruled solid ground. The sea, the sky, the grain. He ruled the in-between. So they set his face wherever the in-between showed through, the way you set a lamp wherever the dark pools. And the way they worshipped him at those stones tells you everything about the relationship, because it barely counts as worship at all. No priesthood, no calendar of sacrifices. A traveler passing a Hermes would pick a pebble out of the dust and add it to the pile at the base, and that was the entire liturgy. Or he would leave a fig on the ledge, a splash of wine, an olive from his pouch, and the next traveler, finding the fig, was welcome to eat it, because food left at the crossroads belonged to whoever the road brought by. Hungry. Next. Think about what that means. The god's own offerings were a supply cache for strangers. His altar was a free lunch counter for anyone desperate enough to need it. There is theology in that arrangement deeper than anything carved over the doors at Delphi. And he paid the road back in luck. The Greeks had a word, and the word is the key to this whole chapter. Hermaion. It means a find, a windfall, the good thing lying in your path that nobody planned, the coin blinking up out of the dust, the dropped ring, the fig on the stone ledge, exactly when your legs are giving out, the stranger at the fork who happens to know the way, the cart with room on it, rattling up behind you. At the moment, your sandal strap breaks. Any piece of luck that arrived on a road, arrived by road rules, unearned, unasked, perfectly timed. The Greeks called a Hermaion, a gift of Hermes. He was the god of the thing you find. You have felt this. Everyone alive has felt this. The folded bill in the pocket of the winter coat, the first cold day of the year, the parking spot, the bus held 4 extra seconds, that small absurd rush of being, briefly, chosen by the day. 3,000 years ago they felt exactly what you feel, and they were more honest than we are, because they gave the feeling a name and a face, and the face was smiling, and it stood at the crossroads collecting pebbles. Now follow the road into town, because the road does go into town. It becomes the main street, and the main street opens into the agora, the market. And the market at mid-morning was his cathedral in full song. Stand in the middle of it, awnings snapping, fish and figs and dye and leather, all arguing for your nose. A man swearing by all the gods that this oil is from his own trees, his grandfather's trees, pressed under his grandfather's stones. And both he and the buyer know the oil is from somewhere up the coast, and the buyer names a price that insults the oil, the trees, and the grandfather, and the seller clutches his chest, wounded, dying, and comes down 4 coppers. Hand slap. The deal is struck. Both men walk away pleased, each certain he skinned the other, and the coins ring on the counting stone, and over the whole roaring theatre of it, from a pillar at the market's edge, the stone face smiles. Because here is the joke the Greeks built right into their religion, with their eyes open. The god of the merchants and the god of the thieves were the same god. They did not have separate gods for those 2 professions. And this was not carelessness. This was observation. They had watched enough market days to know that trade and theft are neighbors, that the 2 trades share a border, the way two farms share a border. And the border is thin, and it moves. The scale that weighs a thumb along with the grain. The story that grows in the telling until the oil has a grandfather. Persuasion, timing, the reading of a face. The price of a thing being not what it is worth, but what you can be talked into. All of it. The whole grey, shimmering territory between a bargain and a robbery was one country, and it had one God. And every merchant in that market prayed to him in the morning, and every cutpurse working the crowd prayed to him too, sometimes side by side at the same stone, and he heard both prayers, and he never once pretended those were different congregations. And when the market closed and the roads emptied and dark came down on the countryside, his last precinct opened, the front door, at night, with a stranger knocking on it. There was a code in that world, one of the oldest and most sacred they had, and it said, you open the door, the traveller at your threshold gets a seat by your fire, food, a bed, and no questions until he has eaten, because the roads were merciless and the inns were few, and every family lived one bad journey away from being the stranger themselves. And to keep the code honest, the stories put teeth in it. The gods, the stories said, go about in disguise. That beggar in the doorway, road filthy, empty-handed, might be anyone, might be the highest ones of all. You do not know. That is the point. You never know. So the only safe policy is kindness. Every door, every knock, every time. One old tale, told and retold across that world, has two such travellers walking into a prosperous town at dusk, shabby, dusty, asking at every door, and every door in town closes on them. The rich houses, the comfortable houses, one after another, bolts sliding home, until at the edge of town, in a hut with a leaking roof, an old couple with nearly nothing open their door all the way. They pour the good wine they were saving. They chase, hopelessly, comically, around the yard after their only goose, wanting to serve their guests something worthy. And the travellers, watching this old man and old woman spend everything they have on two strangers, stand up, and the hut fills with light, and one of the travellers is carrying a golden staff with two snakes on it, and the roof is suddenly very far away and made of gold, and the town that shut its doors is not discussed in polite company after that. The Greeks told that story to their children the way you hand down a house key. Any knock could be him, any beggar, any lost soul at the gate, any stranger at the fire. He had been born at the edge of everything, in a cave, the maps ignored, to a mother hiding from the great and comfortable. Of course he came back, forever after, disguised as the person. The comfortable people turn away. Of course the greatest crime in his religion was a closed door. So look one last time at the whole arrangement laid out along one Greek road at nightfall. A pebble at the crossroads, for safe passage, a fig on the ledge, for whoever needs it, a fair thumb on the scale, or at least a story well told, a door that opens when someone knocks after dark. That was the entire cost of staying right with him, the cheapest religion in the ancient world, and the most honest, because every coin of it was paid directly to other travellers, which is to say, he ran the only cult in history where the offerings went to the congregation, somewhere out there tonight, on the dark side of some hill. The last of the Hermes are still standing. The roads moved. The empires that built them went wherever empires go. But museums keep the stones now, rows of them, square pillars with weathered faces, and the faces are still smiling. And after everything you now know about him, you know exactly what they are smiling about. Somebody is always on the road. Somebody is always almost home. 10 years after the fall of Troy, on an island that appeared on no chart, the god of travelers went to meet the greatest traveler who ever lived. The island was called Aea, and everything about it was slightly wrong. The forest was too lush. The clearings were too quiet. Smoke rose from a house of polished stone deep among the oaks, and around that house wolves and mountain lions padded in slow circles. And the wrong thing about the animals was their eyes. They did not stalk visitors. They came up to visitors and leaned against them and looked up with an expression no wolf has ever worn, an expression that was trying, desperately, to say something. Inside the house lived Circe, a goddess and a witch, the daughter of the sun, and she was beautiful, and she sang at her loom all day in a voice that carried down through the trees like honey dripping. And she hated men, and she had a system. The system worked like this. Sailors landed, because sailors always landed. 10 years of war had filled the sea with lost ships limping home. The smoke drew them in. The singing drew them further. And the beautiful woman at the door invited them to dinner. There was wine, and cheese, and barley, and golden honey, and in the wine there was something else. And when the sailors had drunk, she rose from her chair, and touched each man on the shoulder with a slim wand, and pointed at the door of the pigsty, and the men shrank, and bristled, and fell forward onto hands that were no longer hands, and went where she pointed. Grunting, she kept their minds intact. That was the refinement in the system. The pigs in her sty remembered their names, their wives, the smell of their own harbors. They just could not say any of it anymore. Half the crew of a ship out of Ithaca was in that sty. They had scouted inland, 22 men, and their captain had watched from the tree line, counting, and only one had come running back, too broken to explain anything, except that the men went into the house and did not come out. So now their captain was walking up through the oaks alone. His name was Odysseus, and if any mortal name belongs in this story, it is his. He had spent 10 years taking a city that could not be taken, and it fell, in the end, to a lie he built out of wood. Now he was spending more years finding an island he could not seem to find, which was his own. He was not the strongest man of his generation, and he knew it, and it had never once mattered, because he was the smartest, and he lied the way other men breathed, fluently, joyfully, in self-defense and in art. He had a wife on Ithaca, weaving and unweaving the same shroud to hold off a house full of parasites, and a son growing up on stories of him, and every step he had taken for 10 years had been pointed at one door in the world, his own, and the world kept moving the door. And right now, none of his gifts applied. You cannot outtalk a drug. You cannot outsmart a wand you do not know is coming. He was walking up that path with no plan for the first time in his life, to trade himself for his men at odds of exactly 0, because leaving them in the sty was the one move he could not live with. His cleverness had finally met a locked door with no keyhole in it, which is precisely the moment the young man stepped out of the trees. He came out of the green shade as if he had been strolling there all afternoon, a young man at that beautiful first edge of manhood, the down just showing on his lip, dressed like a traveler, smiling like the road was a private joke between the two of them. Odysseus, whose hand went to his sword out of 10 years of habit, found that his hand did not particularly want to draw it. Something about the young man was familiar in a way that had no memory attached. It felt less like meeting a stranger and more like meeting a rumor he had heard about himself. The young man knew his name. He said it kindly, and asked where he thought he was going. Alone. through country like this. And did he know what was up that path? A goddess with a wand, and a sty full of his friends, and a bench with his name on it. Did he have a plan? He did not have a plan. The young man seemed delighted by this, the way an old master is delighted to find something, at last, that the talented student cannot do. Then he said, "Come here," and crouched down at the base of an oak, and dug his fingers into the black soil, and pulled up a plant. It came out whole in his hand, and Odysseus looked at it, and the poem that preserves this moment stops to look at it too. One small botanical miracle held up in the green light. The root was black. The flower was white as milk. The gods, the young man said, call it moly, and it is hard for mortal men to die. But the gods can do anything. And he brushed the dirt off it and put it in the captain's hand, like a mother putting lunch in a satchel. "Carry this," he said, "and her drug is nothing." And then he did something better than the miracle, something no other god in all of Greek myth ever bothers to do. He gave Odysseus the script, not encouragement, not a riddle to decode later at the worst moment, which was the standard divine product. Oracles were built on it. He laid out the future like a man laying out tools. She will mix the wine. Drink it. It cannot touch you now. She will strike you with the wand. That instant. Draw on her. Fast. Like you mean to kill. She will fold. She will offer everything. And here is the one term you must extract. Make her swear the great oath first, the one no god can break, or you will end up worse than a pig. Every beat of the next hour. Hand it over in advance. The whole locked door opened, and the hinges oiled. Odysseus stood in the woods holding a flower, listening to a stranger read the future to him like a shopping list. And he understood, at some point, who was talking. The poem says he knew. Gods had helped him before. Athena loved him the way a sculptor loves her best statue. But Athena helped with grandeur. Owls and blazing eyes and transformations. This was different. This was practical. This was somebody leaning over his shoulder saying, "The third stair creaks. Skip it. The key is under the pot on the left." This was professional courtesy. Because look at the two of them, standing together in the green shade, and see what the gods saw. Here was a mortal who had gotten off an island held by a nymph and out of a cave held by a giant, who told kings lies so well built they were better than most men's truths, who was called Polytropos by the poets, the man of many turns, the man of twists, which is as close as the Greek language ever came to writing the god's own job description on a human being. A creature of tricks and roads and locked doors, 10 years out, 10 to go, aimed with his whole soul at one small rocky home. And there is a fact under this scene that the poem never says out loud. And it is a shame, because it changes the temperature of everything. Odysseus had a grandfather, his mother's father, a famous old rogue named Autolycus, the champion thief of his age, a man who could steal a herd and change its color by morning, who could swear an oath with a hole in it you could drive the herd back through. Autolycus was renowned for exactly two arts, theft and the slippery oath. And where does a mortal get gifts like those? The old genealogies answer without blinking. Autolycus was a son of Hermes. Run the arithmetic. The god in the green shade was handing a magic flower to his own great-grandson. He was not just helping the best of the travelers. He was helping the family talent, 3 generations downstream, watching his own cleverness look back at him out of a mortal face, out of mortal eyes that had maybe 30 more years to see anything at all. Every trick the god had. This man had a small, breakable, 100-pound version of The speed in those legs. The tongue. Absolutely. The tongue above all. The nerve. The reading of rooms. The love of the winding way over the straight one. Almost him. Except for one thing. And the one thing is the reason this chapter exists. Every road the god had ever taken was a loop with no fixed point. Every road this man took, every single one, bent toward Ithaca. He wanted, with a want that had outlasted a war and the open sea and goddesses actually volunteering to make him immortal. That was the difference between them. Entire. One had every destination and no home. The other had one home, and it organized every step of his life into an arrow. The god put the flower in the arrow's hand and stepped back into the trees. The poem gives the ending quickly, and so will this story, because the ending was never in doubt once the script existed. The wine did nothing. The wand fell. The sword came out on cue, and the goddess dropped to her knees exactly as predicted, and swore the great oath exactly as instructed. And the pigs came trotting out of the sty into the torchlight, and she anointed them one by one, and they rose up out of the animal shapes. Men again, younger, the poem says, and taller and more beautiful than before, and they knew their captain and wept, all of them, and even the witch was moved, far above, or on the next island, or leaning invisible in the doorway, because with him you never knew. The god watched his flower work. He followed the rest of that voyage, all the years of it, the way you follow the fortunes of a relative who went off and did something dangerous and magnificent. He was there again at the end, the poems say, when it finally mattered most. But that is a story for the dark chapters, and it is coming. What he never did, in all the long watching, was say the thing out loud. The kinship, the pride, the sight of his own reflection cast in mortal water. The god of language kept that one in the satchel, undelivered. Some messages you carry your whole life. Nobody ever asks the messenger. Every road he knew, and every one of them went somewhere, and only one of them went home. It ran south, off the map, the way it always had, past the last of the proper roads, up into Arcadia, up the goat tracks, up the long stony shoulder of Mount Silene, to a cave in the mountainside where an old fire burned low, and a goddess sat weaving at a loom, unhurried, unchanged, her sisters wheeling slowly over the pines outside in the enormous night. Maya, she had never left. Olympus had been offered to her, more or less. Once her son held a throne there, and she had considered the courts and the feasts and the politics of heaven. All of it hers for the asking now. She stayed in the cave. Her son, of all beings, understood, and he kept coming back, between errands, between empires. The fastest thing alive would drop out of the southern sky onto that dark mountainside and duck through the doorway he had once poured through as mist, and sit by the fire with his mother, and eat what she gave him, and be, for an evening, nobody's messenger. This was the one room in the universe that had known him before the Sandals. In this room he had a face, and the face did not have to do anything. Arcadia itself pulled at him too, the whole rough country of it, down from the cave, in the high valleys. He kept a second secret life that his own hymns let slip. He herded sheep there, the god of a dozen thrones worth of business, keeper of the roads of the world, would take a flock out on the Arcadian hillsides like any weathered local, for no reason the other gods could have understood, wandering the pastures all day behind a mob of animals with the wind for company. Olympus would have found it hilarious. He did not tell Olympus. Some things you keep off the record, precisely because they matter. And in those valleys lived a girl. She was a nymph, the daughter of a shepherd king named Dryops. And she had beautiful hair. And the old hymn says the gods saw her, and the seeing went deep. And love took him the way weather takes a valley. He courted her in the valleys all one long season. What she saw was presumably not the full god. Gods dim themselves for mortal rooms. What she saw was a bright, quick, young herdsman who talked like running water and knew everything and could not sit still. They were together, and time passed the way it passes in high valleys. And she carried a child. The birth came at night, in the shepherd's house, with the women attending and the fire built up. And this story now has to walk through the next few minutes carefully, because the old hymn does not soften them, and softening them would break something true. The child was born, and the midwife looked at him, and screamed, and fled the house. He had come into the world laughing. That is in the hymn. A newborn, minutes old, merry, chuckling up at the faces over him. He had also come into the world with the legs of a goat, neat little hooves, already hard, with 2 nubs of horn at the hairline, with a crumpled beard on the chin of his baby face. And when he laughed, the laugh was loud and wild and utterly unbabylike, a sound like the mountain itself finding something funny, and it filled the birthing room, and it emptied it. The women ran, and then the mother looked at her child. The hymn gives her 1 line of existence and 1 action. She saw the face and the beard, and she was afraid, and she sprang up, and she left the house, left the child. The poem does not follow her or forgive her or explain her. She simply goes out of the story forever, and the room is silent, and on the bed, alone on the bloody linen, a few minutes into being alive, lies a baby with goat legs, laughing at the ceiling, not yet knowing there is no one left to laugh with. Hold that room for a moment. This story has been in a room like it before. A remote birth, far from marble, the child arriving unannounced, off the map, outside every legitimate line. This exact beginning, down in a cave, 1 mountain over, a generation ago. The difference is that the first baby had a mother who stayed, and this baby's mother was already running downhill in the dark, and the house stood open to the night, and the fire popped, and nobody came. Then somebody came. He would have felt it happen, the way he felt everything on his roads. He came through the doorway of that emptied house, the god of thresholds, crossing the one that mattered most in his own life. And he stood over the bed, and he looked down at his son, at the hooves, at the horns, at the little beard, the wrong face, the whole wild package that had cleared the room in under a minute. And his heart, the hymn says, went bright. He was glad. The Greek is uncomplicated about it. Joy, immediate and total. The joy of a man being handed exactly what he wanted. He laughed, and the baby heard a laugh come back at last and laughed harder. And for a minute, in the Arcadian night, the abandoned house rang with 2 wild voices in the same key, and there was no fear anywhere in the sound of it. And that duet was the whole verdict. Everyone else had voted with their feet. The father looked at the creature that made midwives scream, and thought, mine, and better than mine. Wonderful. Then he did the most Hermes thing recorded anywhere in the mythology. He wrapped the baby up warm, the hymn says, in the skins of mountain hares, soft, dense fur against the newborn skin, a herdsman's swaddling, the best insulation the hills had, and he picked up the bundle, and he walked out under the stars, and he flew straight to Olympus, to the halls of the gods, to the assembled family at their endless feast. Any other god with a child like this had one move, and mythology is littered with the results. You hide him. A cave, a distant island, a mortal foster family, and a monthly delivery of ambrosia. And the awkward branch of the family tree stays decently out of sight. Heaven had a long tradition of managing embarrassment, and heaven was good at it. And this was, by every standard of the age, an embarrassment, a bastard, of a nymph, with hooves. He carried the bundle into the middle of the feast and unwrapped it on the table, sat him down. The hymn says, beside Zeus, in front of everybody, torchlight on horns and hooves, nowhere to look but right at him. The messenger god had spent his whole young life reading rooms, and he read this one perfectly. And what he had brought them was not an apology. Every line of him said, look what happened to my family. Look at this. Can you believe my luck? The baby, delighted by the lights and the crowd, laughed his enormous laugh at the whole pantheon, and Olympus fell for him on the spot. The hymn says all the immortals were delighted, that the hall filled with pleasure at the sight of him, and it names the one who loved the wild boy best of all, Dionysus, god of the vine, patron saint of everything unrespectable, who looked at this hairy, roaring infant and recognized a colleague. They passed him around. The wrong face went from throne to throne, and the laugh boomed, and gods, who terrified whole nations, grinned back down at him. And somewhere in that circuit of gigantic hands, the child stopped being an embarrassment and became a delight, permanently, and they sealed it with a name. They called him Pan. The hymn hangs the name on a happy piece of folk arithmetic. Pan as in the Greek Pan, meaning all, because all of them, every heart on Olympus, was clad. All of us love him. So, Pan. Scholars have quarrelled with the etymology ever since, and the quarrel can have the footnote, because the hymn is not doing linguistics. It is doing something better. The child rejected by one mortal woman in a hill house was named, in effect, everybody's. The family voted, and the vote was unanimous, and the vote was the name. He grew up to be the god of the country his father loved best, Arcadia itself, the goat tracks and the high pastures, the noon heat and the sudden fright that hits you alone in the woods with no cause you can name. They hung that on him too. Panic, his personal signature, the fear with his name inside it. He played pipes he cut from riverbank reeds, and the sound of them drifting down from empty hillsides became the sound of wild Greece, and travellers hearing it would touch the Herm at the next crossroads a little more sincerely. And his father kept coming south. Count what that mountain held now. The cave with the fire and the loom. A mother who never left. The pastures below. A son who never left either, who was the very god of the place. Hooves in the time. Piping at noon. 60 errands a day across the whole face of the world, and every one of them, now, bent slightly around a fixed point in the south, somewhere on those slopes, on some ordinary evening. A herdsman who was more than he looked sat with a goat-legged boy watching the flocks in the last light. The cave of Maya, a dark doorway on the mountain above them, and the boy played his reed pipes. Badly at first, then less badly, while his father listened. 2 instruments had come off this one mountain now, a tortoise shell strung with sheep gut, built by a baby nobody knew existed, which became the lyre, which became all the music of the halls and the temples, and a handful of river reeds, cut by a boy nobody wanted, which became the pipes, which became all the music of the hills and the wild, every song the ancient world had, high or low, traces back up the same Arcadian rock, to the same strange family, to the two of them sitting there in the dusk, the god of every road on earth, and the two reasons the roads had a middle. He never called it home. The word was not in his vocabulary. And this story has been honest about that from the start, and will stay honest. He just always came back. The rain came into Boeotia at dusk, the slow grey kind that settles in and unpacks. And by full dark, the roads of that country were empty, except for one man. He came up the highway from the south with his cloak pulled over his head and his satchel riding under it, walking the way couriers walk, at a pace that eats the miles without ever looking hurried. Anyone watching would have seen a road-worn dispatch man of maybe 25, lean, cheerful about the weather in a way that suggested something wrong with him. And nobody was watching, because everybody with sense was indoors. Ahead, at a crossroads, an inn stood in the rain with its shutters glowing. He stopped at the Hermes outside it, the way you do. The pillar was old. The smiling face nearly rained away, and the pile of pebbles at its base had grown over the generations into a small, respectable cairn. He looked at the worn stone face for a moment, with an expression that no traveller in history has ever aimed at that particular monument. The expression of a man looking at his own portrait and finding the nose not quite right. Then he bent, picked a pebble out of the mud, and set it on the pile. Fair is fair. He, of all people, was not going to be the one who skipped the toll. Then he pushed open the door and stepped over the threshold. And the room turned to look, because rooms always turn to look, and saw only a wet stranger, and turned back to the fire. Take the room in the way he took it in. Low beams, smoke, the good smell of wine warming with spices in a pot by the hearth. A mule driver's whip hung dripping on a peg. At the long table, 5 travellers thrown together by the weather, which is the oldest club in the world. A wool merchant, soft-handed, doing sums on his fingers between sentences. An old soldier with a scarred forearm and the stillness of a man who has spent years waiting for things to start. A woman of middle years in travelling clothes, respectable, tired. A pilgrim by the small laurel sprig pinned at her shoulder, bound for Delphi with a question. A boy of maybe 14, a mule boy, ears burning red at being allowed to sit with adults, and the innkeeper, moving around them all with the pot, filling cups, keeping the fire fed, running the little kingdom that every inn is. The courier paid for wine and bread and a place on the benches for the night, and sat, and steamed, and listened. This was the thing he never told Olympus. Heaven had feasts where the food outshone the guests, and the talk was 10,000 years of the same grudges. And scattered down through the dark world below were 10,000 rooms like this one, firelit boxes full of strangers and steam, and he would trade the nectar for this. Most nights, without thinking twice, he had a seat at the high table of the universe. He kept ending up here, in the cheap seats, where the stories were better. The stories were going around the table now, with the wine. The merchant was heading home, and said the word home the way merchants do, as the place where the ledgers balance. 2 more days east. He said, a wife, a warehouse, a daughter he had promised a silver hairpin from the coast. The soldier was going home too, though his had taken more finding. 20 years under one banner or another. And now a plot of land near Thespiae from a grateful commander, and he described it for the table. The field, the spring, the fig tree by the wall that the previous owner swore gave figs into late autumn. He described that tree the way other men describe women. He had slept in mud from one end of the world to the other, And all of it, every cold year of it, had slowly compressed into the shade of one fig tree he had not yet sat under. The pilgrim was going the other way, toward the god at Delphi, and she did not say what her question was, and the table did not ask, because you never asked, but she talked about the going home after, the road back down through the mountains with an answer in her keeping, whatever it turned out to be, and how the answer would sit with her at her own hearth for the rest of her life. Even her journey to the edge of the divine was, at its root, a round trip. The oracle was the turnaround point. Home was the destination. The mule boy. When the table's attention landed on him and made him redder still, said only that he was taking the mules to Chalcis for his master, and then coming back, and that his mother was keeping his dinner. 4 days there, 4 days back, and a plate waiting, the simplest itinerary at the table, and not one person smiled at it, because every soul in that room, under all their miles, was working from the boy's map. Go out, come back. A plate kept warm somewhere was the entire architecture of human traveling, and everyone knew it. Then the merchant, expansive with wine, turned to the courier drying by their fire, and asked the question the whole evening had been walking toward. And you, friend, where is home for you? The room settled comfortably to hear the answer, the way rooms do, and the fire popped, and the rain went on working at the shutters. The courier looked into his cup, understand what was actually being asked, and of whom. There was a mountain in the south with a cave on it, and a fire in the cave, and a mother at a loom. But a mother is not an address, and he had never slept there 2 nights running since the cattle. There was a throne with his name on it in the most exclusive hall in existence, and it held, at that moment, most likely, his hat. There was a sun on a wild hillside, and there were Hermes with his face at 10,000 crossroads, and there were altars, and offerings, and 100 harbour towns where sailors poured him wine, and if you assembled every place that claimed a piece of him, it came to a map of everywhere. And a map of everywhere is a strange thing, because it is the same, exactly, as no place at all. Every road in the world was his. Every plate on it was kept warm for somebody else. The god of language took a slow drink and gave the table 4 words. Home is up ahead. And the table laughed. And it was the right kind of laugh. Warm, approving. The laugh of settled people saluting a free one. And the soldier said something about having felt that way for 20 years, and look at him now. And the merchant refilled the courier's cup for the good answer. And the talk rolled on to roads and tolls and the price of wool. And nobody in the room noticed what they had just heard. The finest liar in the universe had been asked the one question with no good true answer, and had told the truth. He simply told it in a shape that let everyone take it for wit. Up ahead, it was the only address he had ever had. The evening burned down. The pilgrim retired. Then the merchant, the soldier, and the boy stretched out on the benches, and the innkeeper banked the fire, and the courier lay down last with his hat over his face. In a room, gone soft, with the breathing of strangers, and the smell of wet wool drying. Rain on the roof, embers ticking. Whatever gods do instead of sleeping, he did it there, among them, one warm body in a row of warm bodies, and the night held them all equally, and it was, for 6 or 7 hours, extremely like belonging. He was up before any of them. He was up before the innkeeper, which innkeepers would tell you is impossible. He moved down the sleeping room in the grey first light without a floorboard speaking, and at each bench he stopped and left something by the merchant's boots, a coin in the soldier's pack, standing up so it could not be missed. A coin, in the fold of the pilgrim's cloak, by the mule boy's cap, at the innkeeper's shelf beside the till. A coin, a coin, a coin, old silver, every piece, and finer than the roads usually carried. In a few hours, 5 people would each privately discover a small windfall, turn it over, glance around, pocket it, and walk on into their day, very slightly blessed. And every one of them would use, without knowing its weight, the old word for it, Hermaion, a lucky find, travellers helped by the road itself. The offerings, as always in his religion, went to the congregation. At the door he stopped, with his hand on the latch, and looked back. It was his hour, the one he loved best and told no one about, the hour when the world lies still and finished, like a message written and sealed and waiting to be carried. 5 sleepers in the ember light, the soldier already under his fig tree, somewhere behind his eyes, the boy already home with his plate, all of them anchored, even in sleep, to some fixed point out there in the rainy dark that pulled on them the way the ground pulls. And he stood at the threshold outside all of those gravities, holding the latch, the freest thing that has ever existed, looking at the one wealth in creation that could not be stolen, bought, or invented from parts. A second longer he looked. Then the door clicked, and the road took him, and he was already moving. The rain had stopped. The world was rinsed and new and his. All of it, every mile, in every direction, to the ends of the map and past them, and every mile of it, every road he owned, if you followed it far enough, past the last farm and the last shrine and the last of the morning light, drained at last down to the one border even roads are afraid of, the crossing at the bottom of everything, where his strangest duty waited. The dead do not know the way. Somebody has to walk them down. There is a line in Homer, and it comes up twice. Once in each of the 2 great poems. The way a thing comes up twice when the poet wants you to keep it. It is about the golden staff, and it says, of the God who carries it, that with this wand he seals the eyes of men in sleep, and wakes them again whenever he wills. Read that again slowly, because 3,000 years of statues have shown you the messenger, the runner, the god of the bright, noisy daylight world of roads and markets and errands. And Homer is telling you about the night shift. The staff was an instrument of sleep, the fastest god in the universe, the one who never stopped moving, held in his fist, all along, the power of perfect stillness. He could close any eye in creation with a touch, and open it again. And this was so central to who he was that the oldest poet put it in the god's introduction. Twice, like a title. So follow him. Now, on the rounds, nobody wrote hymns about. The sun is long down. The errands of heaven are delivered, and the god of the roads goes out over the dark face of the world, low and slow for once. No hurry anywhere in him. Over a country where the fires are going out, one by one. A fishing village first. On the coast, a dozen stone cottages above a beach where the boats are drawn up for the night. In the nearest cottage, a fisherman lies in the dark with his eyes open, doing arithmetic. The catch is thin this month. The nets want mending. The boat wants pitch. The middle daughter wants marrying. And the numbers circle his bed like gulls. The same numbers. Around and around. The way night numbers do. Never adding differently, no matter how many times he runs them. His wife breathes beside him. He stares at the rafters and runs the numbers again. The shutter does not open. Nothing enters the room that a watcher could have sworn to. There is only, at some point, a presence by the bed, the way there is sometimes a presence in a room in the moment before sleep, felt at the edge of the skin and the tip of a staff, golden, warm, comes down as light as a moth landing, and touches the fisherman on the eyes. The numbers scatter like gulls before a thrown stone. The circling stops. Something in his chest that had been wound tight since the taxman's visit lets go, notch by notch, and his breathing drops down to where his wife's breathing is, and finds it, and settles in beside it. Matched. The rafters go away. The month goes away. He is asleep, deep in it, deeper than worry can dive, and the presence by the bed is already gone. A palace next. Inland, because the wand plays no favorites. A king lies in a great carved bed, and around the bed stand guards, and the guards keep out everything except the thing that is keeping him awake, which is tomorrow. Envoys come at noon from an enemy who may want peace, or may want to see the fortifications up close, and every man in the court has given the king different advice, and the king lies in the dark under the weight of a decision that cannot be delegated, which is the loneliest weight there is. Kings famously do not sleep. The poets of every age have said so. The staff touches his eyes anyway, gently, entirely unimpressed by the guards, and the king sleeps like his own stable boy, who is also asleep, touched 2 minutes ago, and for the next 6 hours the palace holds 200 sleeping souls, and no ranks at all, just breath, rising and falling in the dark, every chest in the building keeping the same slow time. Sleep is the one country where all of them hold equal citizenship. The god who guards borders guards this one too, and of every border in his keeping. This is the one where he suspends all tolls. A sick child in a hill town, hot and restless, turning and turning in a tangle of blanket while her mother wrings water from a cloth. The touch comes to the child, mid-whimper, and the whimper smooths out into breath, and the small body goes still and loose, the way fever bodies finally do. And then, because the wand is thorough, it dips once more, and touches the mother where she kneels, and she goes down softly onto the bed beside her daughter without ever deciding to, and the cloth is still in her hand at dawn, all night, every night, across the whole dark half of the turning world. The old poet said that the last thing before sleeping, the very last act of the Greek day, was to pour him an offering, a few drops of wine tipped out for the god of the wand, and then you lay down and closed your eyes and put yourself, quite literally, in his keeping until morning. Sleep was travel. Everyone understood this once. You leave here. You go somewhere else. Somewhere with its own roads and its own strange weather. And you come back changed by however many hours you spent away. And travel. All travel. Every kind. Over every border. Was his department. The nightly crossing into sleep was simply the one journey that everybody, king and mule boy, made every single day of their lives. And so he stood at that crossing every single night, the busiest of all his crossroads, and saw the whole human race through the gate, one pair of closed eyes at a time. And on the far side of the gate, he had a second responsibility, stranger than the first. The dreams themselves. The Greeks did not think dreams were made inside your head. Dreams came from outside, from beyond the wall of the world. They were sent things, message-shaped, and they had to be carried and delivered to the sleeper like anything else that gets carried and delivered. And there was exactly one God whose entire existence was carrying and delivering. The old hymns call him the guide of dreams, conductor of them. The dreams gathered at their gates out past the edge of things. The old poets imagined 2 such gates, one of ivory for the false dreams, one of plain horn for the true, and from there they had to travel, over the dark, down through the roof of the night, to the one particular sleeper each was addressed to. And he ran that route, the way he ran every route, the nightly mail of the universe, and all of it moved through his hands. Think of what a knight's satchel held: warnings for kings, the famous freight, the dreams that stopped wars or started them. But those were rare. The registered mail, the bulk of every night, was ordinary. A dead grandmother's face, returned for a moment to a grandson who was starting to forget it, delivered to a farmhouse in Thessaly, the solution to the wall that kept falling, slipped in sideways to a mason near Corinth, disguised as a dream about weaving, an hour by the sea for a slave woman in a mill town who had been sold away from the coast 30 years ago, and still, some mornings, woke with salt in her nose, small parcels, perfectly aimed, no sleeper, too humble for a delivery, because the deliverer had never in his existence checked a recipient's rank. That was the whole shape of his religion. The offerings down at the Crossroads were anyone's lunch. By day he carried the words of Zeus to the great. By night he carried something better addressed. The poets never say where dreams are written, or by whom. It is the one route in all his territory, with a blank at the far end of it, and he never filled the blank in for anyone. And maybe that was messenger's discretion, and maybe he did not know either. He knew the roads, and the doors, and which gate each parcel left by. Even the mailman does not read everything. The night is deep now, deeper than when this chapter started. Across the dark country the last fires are ash, and the last warriors have been touched on the eyes, and the whole sleeping world lies breathing in one slow rhythm under the wheeling stars. Every order unmanned, every rank suspended, every soul away on its private journey, and expected back by light. He crosses above it all at his easiest glide. The satchel light now. The night's last parcels gone to their sleepers, and there is no hurry left anywhere in the world. And the only eyes still open anywhere below belong to the ones partway through the crossing, the ones just now going under. Warm, heavy, half here, which is to say, at this particular hour, in this particular dark, you. The Greeks tipped out a little wine and trusted him with the trip. You have come most of the way on your own tonight. The wand is very old, and very gentle, and it has never missed a sleeper yet. He wakes them again. Homer says, whenever he wills. Morning is his department too. He has never once been late with it. You can go. Everything in this chapter is what the ancient Greeks imagined about the far side of death, and it should be said plainly that it is imagination, a picture painted by people 3,000 years gone, who wondered what we wonder and had poets instead of answers. But of all the pictures they painted, this one is the gentlest, and it deserves to be seen the way they saw it. Once, all the way through. Start where they started. Start in the room. A man has died in the night. He was old, and it was expected, and the house has been sitting up with him for 3 days. So when it comes quietly, a tide going out between one breath and the next, and in the way the Greeks imagined it. The man sits up. The sitting up is easy. That is the first strange thing. Nothing hurts, which, after this particular year, is so unfamiliar that it takes him a moment to identify the feeling. He sits up light as smoke, and turns, and sees the room, his own room, the lamp burning low, his daughters, his son, his wife of 50 years, and he sees that they are all looking at the bed, and crying, and he follows their eyes down to see what they are looking at. Oh, He thinks. He speaks to them. This is the second strange thing. And the worst one. He says their names. And nothing in the room moves toward him. He stands directly in front of his son, a hand's width away, and says his name. The name he chose for him at 9 days old and shouted across fields and harbors for 40 years. And his son looks straight through the place where he is standing and begins to weep into his hands. The old man stands in the middle of his family, in the middle of his own house, and understands that he is present the way a draft is present. His whole world is 3 feet away, and it might as well be across the sea. And he does not know what to do. Nobody knows what to do. That was the Greek insight. The thing this whole imagined picture was built to answer. Every living person is a local. We know our rooms, our roads, our harbors, and death, in their picture of it, was the one journey taken without a single mile of practice, in unfamiliar country, with no map, no guide, no phrase, book, alone. On the very night you are newest and most lost, the old man drifts to the doorway of his own house and stops at it. The threshold he has crossed 12,000 times, because for the first time in his life he does not know what is on the other side. And standing in the courtyard, waiting for him, is a traveler, a young man, in a road-worn hat, with a golden staff in his hand, leaning against the gatepost, the way someone leans who has all the time in the world and is spending it, right now, gladly, on you. And the third strange thing of the night, the good one, is that the old man can tell the traveler sees him. Those bright eyes are pointed at him, exactly at him, at the him that his own son just looked through, and the traveler smiles a little and straightens up off the gatepost as if the two of them had planned to meet here all along. That is who the guide was. In the Greek picture, not a summons, not a soldier come to march you off, not a clerk with a ledger, nothing with a scythe, a traveller at your gate on the worst night of your existence, whose whole manner said one simple thing: I know the way. Come on. You cannot get lost if you are with me. They walk. And here the old poets did something quietly wonderful, because the road they imagined out of the world begins as a completely ordinary road. It runs past the neighbour's wall, past the well, down the lane. The old man walked 10,000 mornings. Past the field he broke his back on for 50 years, and the guide walks it with him at an old man's pace, unhurried, and lets him look at all of it. And this stretch of the road is a kindness with no name, the stretch where the world you are leaving lines up along the way to see you off. Then the lane bends where it never used to bend. The light changes first. It does not go dark. That is the thing every soul expected, and it is wrong. It goes grey and gentle, the exact light of the hour before sunrise, held steady, a dusk with no clock behind it. The fields give way to meadows of a pale flower the old man does not recognize. Asphodel, growing in drifts to the horizon like snow that took root. The air is still, and somewhere on that stretch the old man realizes there are others on the road, coming in from side paths, the way streams come into a river. Dozens, then hundreds, every one of them newly light, every one of them lost, and all of them drawing without thinking toward the figure with the staff, the way cold hands draw toward a fire. He gathers them as he goes. That was the picture. Every soul that died that day, from every deathbed and battlefield and shipwreck on earth. And every night he walked down at the head of a great quiet crowd of the newly dead, and the crowd followed the hat and the staff through the grey meadows, and he did the thing for them that he had done at every campfire and every Crossroads inn since the beginning. He talked, all the way down, the whole road, that low, running voice, warm as a lamp, pointing things out, the flowers, the strange birds, the way the light behaves, telling stories, old owns, funny ones, the one about the cattle and the willow trees, the one about the tortoise, answering the question each soul finally worked up the courage to ask, which was always the same question. What happens now? And answering it honestly, in the plainest words. The river is ahead. The ferryman takes you over. The coin your family put under your tongue is his fee. No, it does not hurt. Nothing here hurts. The hurting part is finished. You did that part already. That part is done forever. Anything but silence. He had carried words his whole existence, and he knew exactly what words were for. And this was it. This road, of all his roads, was the one where the sound of a voice mattered more than anything the voice said. A crowd walking behind a story does not feel like a crowd of the lost. It feels like travelers. It feels, almost, like a festival procession, headed somewhere, together, expected. The river is the border, black water, wide and slow, and the far bank fading up out of the grey, and the ferry coming across to meet them, poled by the old ferryman, grim as a toll booth. And here, at the waterline, the guide's territory ended. He did not cross. The kingdom on the far side had its own king, the quiet brother, the one who never came up, and its own laws. And the guide of the roads delivered his travellers to the shore the way a courier delivers to a door, and saw them onto the boat. And that was the errand. Complete. But at the waterline, the old poets knew, is where you learn what a guide is. Because look at who is standing on that shore. In the crowd, on any given night of the world, a king is standing there. He died yesterday with 40,000 men sworn to him. And he is discovering, tonight, on the wet gravel, what his word is worth on this side of the river, which is exactly what the beggar's word is worth, who is standing beside him. Every night of the world, the great and the terrible arrived at that shore and reached, out of lifelong habit, for the levers. And the levers were gone. Command was a coin from a country this river did not trade with. Wealth had been reduced, in full, to the one small piece of silver under the tongue, of everything they had spent a life gathering, guarding, wielding. The entire estate came down to this: a boat fee, and a place in line, and a guide who had walked beside them the whole way down, talking, exactly as gently as he talked to everyone. That was why it had to be him. Sit with the Greek logic, one moment, because it is the tenderest thing they ever worked out. They looked at their gods and asked which one should keep the dead company on the last road. And the thunder was wrong, and the majesty was wrong. Anything with a throne was wrong, because thrones were precisely what death made ridiculous. What the road needed was the one god with no seat of power anywhere, no palace, no kingdom, no gravity. The one who had spent his whole existence at ground level among travelers and strangers and the small luck of ordinary people. At the end of every road, they wanted someone who knew roads. So the ferry fills and poles off, and the old man from the farmhouse stands in the stern with his fare paid, looking back, the way all of them look back. And the last thing every Greek soul saw of the living side of the river was the same thing. A traveller on the shore, hat and staff, hand raised, seeing them off, behaving, to the very last, as if this were any other departure on any other road, as if the crossing were the most natural thing in the world, which, his whole easy stance insisted, it was. It is only the next country over. I deliver there daily." Then the grey took the boat, and he turned, and went back up the long road through the asphodel, gathering tomorrow's travellers as he went. He made that walk every night of the ancient world. He never missed one. Think of every person who ever fell asleep in that civilization, believing that when the time came, however it came, storm or spear or quiet old age, there would be somebody at the gate, somebody cheerful, somebody local, somebody who could not get lost. Of everything the Greeks ever imagined, every marble god and every monster, that may be the most humane thing they built. A friend at the door, for everyone, at the end. He led the dead down every night for ages, and the road only ran one way, and everyone in the universe understood that, until the year the world began to starve. It started as a wrongness in the fields. The kind farmers noticed before anyone else. The barley came up thin. The olive trees held their fruit small and hard, and then dropped it early. All of it, everywhere, in the same month. Seed went into the ground and sat there like gravel. One bad season, and men tightened their belts. Two, and they slaughtered the plough oxen, and then it stopped being seasons at all, because the green simply went out of the world the way warmth goes out of a corpse, everywhere at once, and would not come back. The gods knew exactly what was wrong, and the name of what was wrong was Demeter. She was the goddess of the grain, the power in every growing thing, and she had stopped working, not in anger at mankind. Mankind was simply standing in the blast radius. Her daughter had been taken, Persephone, the girl of the spring, out picking flowers in a meadow one morning, and the earth had opened, and a chariot had come up out of the dark with the quiet king of the dead holding the reins, and he had taken her down and made her his queen, and the ground had closed over the whole event like water, and Zeus had allowed it. That was the rot at the center. The quiet brother had asked for the girl, and Zeus had nodded, and nobody had asked her mother, and nobody, it goes without saying, had asked the girl. So Demeter went looking, 9 days, with torches, and when she finally learned the truth, she did not rage at heaven. She did something far more frightening. She resigned. She put off her divinity like a coat, wrapped herself in black, wandered the earth as an old woman, and let every field on the planet die behind her. The message was addressed to Olympus and written in famine, and it said, "Bring back my daughter, or preside over a kingdom of bones." The dead began arriving at the river below, in numbers no one had ever seen. He knew before any god on Olympus how bad it was, because he was the one walking them down. Every night the crowd behind his staff grew, and the crowd was wrong. Too many children in it, too many mothers, whole villages arriving together, thin as sticks, and the meadows of asphodel filled and filled, while the meadows of the living turned to dust. He walked at the head of that swelling procession night after night, talking, always talking, and climbed back up each dawn into a world that smelled more and more like the place he had just left. Olympus held out for 1 year of that, and broke. Zeus sent messengers to Demeter with gifts and titles and apologies, and she looked through them exactly the way the living look through the dead. The fields stayed grey, and at last Zeus arrived at the only door left, the one at the bottom, the brother in the dark, and for that door there was only one possible knock. He summoned his courier, and the courier heard the destination, and the errand under the errand, and this time the satchel held something no messenger had ever carried in the history of the universe, an order to give one back. Down he went, not at night, not with the crowd, alone, on the road he knew better than any being alive, past the meadows, over the river, that had no fare for the living, because the living did not come here, to the gates, and through them, into the house of Hades. Stand in that hall with him a moment. It was a palace, and it was magnificent, and it was the stillest place in creation. Grey gardens, halls of silent splendor, every stone perfect, nothing moving anywhere. A kingdom rich beyond counting in the one coin nobody wants. On the throne sat the elder brother, the grim host, dark and patient as bedrock, and beside him, on a throne she had not asked for, sat a girl with spring flowers still somehow woven in her hair, months old now, and not one petal wilted, because nothing dies in the deathless country, which meant nothing about her had been allowed to change, including her grief. She was pale as the asphodel. She had eaten nothing, they said. She sat like a held breath, and into that hall, hat in hand, staff in the crook of his arm, came the only visitor this palace ever received, the one being in the universe equally at home, above and below. And he bowed to the king, and delivered the words of Zeus. Let her go up. Her mother starves the earth. Mankind dies wholesale. The order of everything founders. Let her go up to her mother. Hades listened, and Hades, the old poets say, smiled, which in that hall was an event like weather, and turned to his queen, and told her, gently enough by his lights, that she could go. She was on her feet before the sentence finished. The stillness of months broke off her in one motion, and the poets say she leapt up in joy, and the whole grey hall seemed to lean toward the sound. But her husband, at the door, in the moment of parting, offered her a pomegranate, and she took it, and ate a few seeds, small and red and sweet after a year of nothing, and whether she knew the old law or not. The old law knew her. Whoever eats in the land of the dead belongs to it. Not all of her. It would be haggled out later, the way everything in that family was haggled out later. A few seeds, a share, a lien on the spring. The courier watched her eat them from across the hall, and said nothing, because his orders said up, and up they were going to go. But he had brokered enough bargains at enough market stalls to know a thumb on a scale when he saw one, and he filed it away, and helped her into the golden chariot, and took the reins himself. Now comes the ride, and the ride is the whole reason this chapter exists. Every road he had ran down. This once. The procession pointed the other way, and it was a procession of two, and he drove it himself, out through the gates, back over the black river, the ferryman staring, up into the endless grey meadows. And he did on that road what he did on every road since the beginning of him. He talked, but every other night his voice ran downhill, easing travellers into the dark. Here is what comes next. The hurting part is done. Tonight, for the first time in the existence of the universe, the voice ran uphill, and everything it carried was the opposite freight. Your mother has not stopped looking for 1 hour. The fields are waiting for you like dry riverbeds. There are almond trees up there that have been holding their blossom for a year. Out of respect, wait until you smell rain on hot stone again. Wait, just wait, until you see what the sun does the moment it hears. And the light began to change. It came the way it had gone, in reverse, grey thinning at the edges of things, the dusk that never moved beginning, mile by mile, to move. The girl stood gripping the chariot rail, leaning forward like the figurehead of a ship, and the grey went pearl, and the pearl warmed, and somewhere far up the tunnel of the world a point of true gold appeared and grew, and the horses ran at it, and the girl made a sound that was not quite a word, Then they came up, out of the earth, into the morning, into the full pour of daylight, and the light of the living world landed on Persephone for the first time in a year. She flinched from it, both hands over her face. The poets did not record that detail, but any returning traveler could have, because that is what light does after long darkness. It arrives like a wave, and then she opened her fingers slowly and let it in, and the world had color in it again, green. Struggling up already through the grey stubble at the sound of her arrival, blue laid over everything, horizon to horizon, ridiculous, extravagant, her own hands, pink with running blood. She stood in the chariot, turning her face in the sun, the way the parched turn under rain, and across the plain, from the temple at Eleusis, a figure in black was already running. The reunion of Demeter and Persephone stands, even now, as one of the great embraces in the memory of the world, and the poets threw everything they had at it. And this story will do something the poets, somehow, never thought to do. It will look, for one moment, at the third figure on that plain. He had stopped the chariot. He had stepped down and back, 3 paces, bore out of the picture entirely, and stood holding the horses with his hat brimmed down, doing the thing he did best of all and was thanked for least, vanishing at the right moment. A courier of any experience knows the instant a delivery stops being his, and it is the instant the door opens. And he stood apart in the young light and watched the mother arrive like a landslide, watched the two of them collide and hold, down in the grass, indistinguishable, while around them, outward from that exact spot in rings, visibly, mile on mile, as the news moved through the roots of things, the entire world turned green. He watched the spring invented in front of him. Then he coughed politely into the joy, because there remained the matter of the seeds, and heaven's accountants would want it settled. It settled the way everything in that family settled, in shares, for the seeds she had eaten, a season below with her husband each year, for her mother, the balance, and so the arrangement was struck that runs the calendar of the earth to this day, and buried in it, rarely noticed, is one final clause that belongs to this chapter and crowns it. Somebody has to drive her, every autumn, down, every spring, back up, the same road, the same chariot, the same guide at the reins, forever, once a year, scheduled, recurring, eternal. The one-way road runs backward, and the girl comes up out of the ground into the light, and the world goes green at the sight of her. Run the full ledger of his nights, souls led down beyond all counting, a river of them, every human being of a civilization, one direction, no exceptions, and against that entire dark column, one entry on the other side, one passenger, one road, driven up. The Greeks knew that ratio. They lived inside it. And that is the last thing to understand about why spring, in that country, felt the way it felt, why they built their deepest and most secret rites around this one homecoming, why grown men wept at Eleusis, at things they were forbidden to repeat. Spring was not weather to them. Spring was the exception. It was the one crack in the one law with no other cracks in it. Proof, renewed annually, arriving in flowers, that the road down was not entirely one way, that at least once, for at least one girl, with the right driver holding the reins, something the dark had taken could be carried back. Every year he made that drive. Every year, somewhere in the world, it is being made. Look out any window. Whatever the season is doing, It is doing it because a courier is somewhere on that road, going down, or coming up. The delivery has never once failed. 12 days after the death of Hector, the walls of Troy had learned a new sound, and the sound came at dawn. Every morning, as the light came up over the plain, a chariot would appear from the Greek camp, and behind the chariot, dragging in the dust, was a body. Achilles drove. He drove 3 times around the tomb of his friend Patroclus. The friend Hector had killed, and what he dragged behind him was Hector, breaker of horses, defender of Troy, the best man the city ever raised. Then Achilles went back to his tent and lay in the dust and could not sleep. And the next dawn, he did it again. His rage had outlived its target. He had killed the man 12 days ago, and it had fixed nothing. And he had nothing left to do with the fire in him, except this. And the body would not spoil. That was the strange mercy inside the horror. 12 days, behind a chariot, and no mark held. The gods themselves kept Hector whole, the poets say, and one god in particular, the Lord of Light, who had loved Troy and loved Hector, held a golden shield over the flesh and would not let the dust take it. High on the wall each dawn stood the family, watching what no family should see. And in the palace, on the 12th day, an old man stood up. Priam was the king of Troy, and he had been a great king in a great city, and the war had eaten it all. 50 sons he had raised. Most of them were dead, and the best of them was down there, in the dust, behind an enemy's chariot. And that night, over the weeping of his wife and the begging of his household, who told him truthfully that he was walking into his own death, the old man ordered a cart, loaded, robus, tripods, cauldrons, gold weighed out in the balance, a cup given him by kings, treasure heaped past counting. He was going to drive into the enemy camp, alone, but for one old herald to hold the mules, and find the man who had killed his son, and buy the body back. There was no plan beyond that. There was no protection at all. An old man, a cart of gold, and a camp of 50,000 men who had spent 10 years learning to hate everything Trojan. Every step of the road he was proposing ran through men who would kill him on sight. And he knew it, and he called for the mules anyway. Zeus was watching. Zeus, the poets say. He saw the old man roll out of the gates at dusk and was moved, and turned, and spoke to his son. And the words Homer gives him are worth carrying whole, because they are the truest thing anyone ever said about the god. This story is about Hermes. Zeus said, "You, above all the gods, love to walk beside a mortal man. Go down, guide Priam through the camp of the Greeks, so that no man sees him until he stands before Achilles. You, above all the gods, love to walk beside a man, his whole existence." In one sentence, spoken by his father, he was in the air before it was finished. Down on the plain, full dark now. The cart had reached the ford of the river, and the 2 old men had stopped to water the mules, and the herald saw him first, a figure, coming toward them across the open ground in the dark. The old herald's whisper cracked with fear. Their blood, Homer says, ran cold. This was the moment. Then, caught in the open, in enemy country, by a man walking out of the night, and Priam stood frozen by the cart, with the hair standing on his old head, too far gone even to run, and the figure came up close, and was a young man, at that loveliest first edge of manhood, the down just on his lip, a face like good news, and he did the last thing on earth either old man expected. He took Priam gently by the hand, and asked, in a voice full of nothing but kindness, where a father could possibly be driving such treasure at such an hour, through a night full of his enemies. "Are you not afraid?" he asked, and the question held no threat anywhere in it, only wonder, and something close to tenderness. "Old father," he said, "I look at every fear in Priam drained out through that held hand." He could not have said why. Men could never say why. Trust arrived with this stranger, the way warmth arrives with a fire, and it had been arriving that way since a courtroom on Olympus at the beginning of the world. And an old king in the worst night of his life had no defense against it at all, and needed none. The young man said he was a Myrmidon, a squire from the camp of Achilles himself. And then, because he could read what was tearing at the old man under everything else, he gave Priam a gift before Achilles gave him anything. "Your son," he said. "I have seen him with my own eyes. 12 days. And the dust has not touched him, and every wound has closed, and he lies whole as the evening he died. The gods love your boy, old man, even dead." And Priam, hearing that his child's body was safe, wept in the dark by the ford, and the weeping had relief in it for the first time in 12 days. Then the young man swung up into the cart, and took the reins and the whip, and said he would drive. What happened next? The poem tells with a kind of hush. The mule cart rolled across the plain toward 50,000 enemies, and came to the ditch and the wall of the camp, and the sentries were at their posts, and dinner fires still burned, and the young driver breathed sleep over all of them. That is Homer's line. He poured sleep on the sentries, every watching eye along the wall. One sweep of the staff he carried, and the eyes closed. Where the men stood, there had been a night, long ago, at the beginning of him, when he had closed 100 eyes one by one, slowly, with stories, and steel waiting at the end of it. That was his first great task, and its name hung on him forever. Now watch the same gift, grown old and deep, thousands of eyes this time, an entire army sung under in a single pass, and the steel stayed home, and what came through the sleeping camp instead of a blade was a father, on a creaking cart, with a ransom for his son, the same hand, the same wand. It had learnt what it was for. Gates opened that 3 strong men could barely bar. The cart rolled through the sleeping heart of the Greek army, past the fires, past the stacked spears, all the way to the high fence of Achilles' own compound, and the great bolt lifted, and inside, at last, with the tent of the killer of Hector standing firelit before them, the young driver pulled up the mules and stepped down, and changed. Priam turned and saw, where the kind young squire had been, something taller, standing very quietly in the dark, with small wings stirring at the heels, and he understood in a rush who had held his hand at the river. The god spoke plainly. "Hermes," he said, "my father sent me to walk beside you, but I will not go in," he said. A god, waiting on a mortal openly, face to face, would give offense to the order of things. "This last door is yours. Go in alone," and clasp the killer by the knees, and speak to him of his own father, far away, old, like you. Then he was gone, the way he was always gone, like a lamp going out, and the old man stood alone in the middle of the enemy camp, before the tent, and gathered himself, and went in. What happened inside the tent is the summit of the Iliad, and one of the summits of everything humans have ever written down, and it belongs to the 2 men who lived it. So this story will stay outside, in the dark, where the god stayed, and hear it, the way he heard it, through the firelit seam of the door, an old man's voice. asking a warrior to think of his own grey father, and then saying the sentence that has never been surpassed. In 3,000 years, no one has surpassed it. I have done what no man on earth has ever done. I have kissed the hands of the man who killed my sons. And then the sound of weeping, in 2 registers, the old voice, broken open at last, grieving the son, and under it, unbelievably, the young voice too, the most terrible soldier who ever lived, weeping for his own father who would soon lose him, and for the friend he could not bring back, the 2 of them filling the tent. The poem says, with the sound of it, grief meeting grief in the middle of the night, in the middle of a war, with nothing left in either man to fight with. Outside, among 5,000 sleeping enemies, a god stood in the dark by a mule cart, keeping the watch, listening to the weeping of 2 men he had arranged to be in the same room. He had carried verdicts and armies' orders and the mail of heaven. He had never carried anything like this. There was no message tonight. There had been no message the whole way. He had delivered 1 broken old man to 1 broken young one. That was the entire manifest. And out of that delivery was coming the only peace this war would ever produce. The sound, through a tent wall, of an enemy being handed back his dead with honor, of hatred, just for 1 night, laying itself down. Inside, after the weeping, came quieter sounds, food being set out, because the young man insisted even grief must eat. 2 voices, low, almost easy, then nothing, sleep, and Hermes let the night run as deep as it safely could before he slipped inside and touched the old king awake, because the wand woke as gently as it put under, and dawn was coming, and dawn could not find Priam here. They rolled out through the sleeping army in the last of the dark, the god at the reins, and behind them in the cart, washed, wrapped in soft robes by Achilles' own order, rode Hector, going home, at the ford of the river, where he had first taken the old man's hand. The god pulled up. First light was coming into the sky. Ahead, on the far bank, was Troy, the walls, the watchers, the world of men and their wars. The crossing was his, and only the crossing. He handed the reins to Priam at the boundary line, the way he had handed everything at every boundary since the beginning. And the old poets say he went back up to Olympus from that riverbank, and the cart rolled on into the rising light, alone. From the walls of Troy, a daughter saw the cart coming in with the dawn, and her cry raised the whole city. The Iliad is a poem about rage. It announces rage in its very first word, and rage drives every line of it for 15,000 lines. And then it does not end in a victory, or a sack, or a triumph. It ends in a funeral truce. It ends with an old man bringing his son home through the grey morning, and a city weeping together, and 11 days of peace so that Troy could bury Hector. Breaker of horses, that is the final line of the whole poem, and the hinge that the ending turns on. The reason the old man lived to bring the body home. There was a god in a traveller's hat who walked beside him through 50,000 sleeping enemies and asked for nothing and vanished before the thanks of all the deliveries in his 10,000 years. That was the greatest, and it carried no words at all. A father, through the dark, a song, home to his city. Some messages have no words in them. The best ones, maybe, the best ones almost never do. Troy fell, and the age of heroes ran out, and the temples themselves grew old, and the world moved on, the way the world does, and he did what he had always done about borders. He crossed, The Romans came and conquered Greece, and were conquered right back by everything Greece had made. And they carried the gods home with them and gave them Roman names. And the name they gave the quick one, the traveler, tells you exactly what they saw in him, because they built it from their own word for merchandise, for trade, for the deal struck at the crossing of two roads. Mercury, the god of the moving goods. He took the new name the way he took everything, lightly, and kept traveling. Look up at the evening sky and you can watch how far he traveled. There is a planet in there, the innermost one, the small, bright runner that circles the sun faster than anything else in the heavens. A full circuit in 88 days, while the Earth takes its stately year, the old astronomers watching it dart back and forth around the sun. Never still, never far from the fire, needing nothing, gave it the only name that fit. Mercury. It is up there right now, the fastest world we have, running its endless errand around the light. And there is a metal, the strangest one we know, the only metal on Earth that is liquid, that runs. Pour it into a palm, and it gathers itself into a bright bead and trembles there. Whole, self-contained, impossible to grip. And the moment the hand tips it, is gone, flowing, splitting, rejoining, escaping. The old alchemists, who spent their lives trying to pin the world's substances down, met this one thing that would not be pinned. They should die knew its name on sight. Quicksilver. The common folk called it living silver. The learned wrote Mercury, and the symbol they drew for it was his staff. Those same centuries told stories of an ancient sage, Hermes the thrice greatest, and filled books with secrets under his name, and sealed their vessels so perfectly that nothing, no vapor, no spirit, could slip the join, and named the seal after the god of slipping through, hermetically sealed. We still say, the highest compliment locksmiths ever paid a burglar, 3,000 years of trying, and the only lock they trusted was one named for him. And then, in the year 1958, the newest country in the story decided to send human beings off the planet. The first program, the one that would carry the first Americans out of the world and bring them home again, needed a name. And think for a moment about what was actually being attempted. A man sealed in a metal bead, thrown across the most dangerous border that exists, the line between the Earth and everything else, expected back safely by nightfall. There was only ever one god for that job description. They named the program Mercury, and the messenger went up first, before anything else, the way the messenger has always gone first. And the great ships that followed him to the moon a decade later carried the name of his big brother. Apollo got the glory of the moon. Every schoolchild knows Apollo, but go back and look at the order of it. Before the chariot of the sun could fly, a quicker god went ahead, alone, to find out if the road was safe. That was always the whole job. He is thick in your ordinary day too, hiding in plain sight the way he likes best. His winged sandals fly on the logos of flower shops and delivery trucks. His staff hangs, through a happy ancient mix-up with his nephew's serpent rod, outside half the pharmacies on Earth, and every time the small machine in your pocket trembles with a message from somebody far away, words crossing the dark to reach one particular person, you are holding the cheapest, busiest Hermes ever built, and the old god of the crossing is somewhere in the circuitry, grinning. But leave the centuries now. Leave the planets and the pockets. Go back to the road. The same road this story started on. The dirt one. In the hill country. At night. Under the moon. The traveler who walked it that first evening got home safe. And slept. And lived his life. and his grandchildren's grandchildren wore new roads over the old ones. And the empires came through and left, and the crossroads is still there. The pillar is still there. The pile of pebbles at its base grew for 1,000 years, and the smiling face has weathered now almost all the way back into the stone. And the stone does not mind. He never wanted the marble treatment. He wanted the crossroads itself, the place where you stand with your life for a moment and choose a direction. And he got it. Forever. Other gods ruled lands and seas and cities. Solid things. Things that could fall. He took the moments between things. The step through the door. The word between two people. The space between the last country and the next one. And moments between things are the one territory in existence that no army has ever managed to burn. Listen to the road a moment. Somewhere on it, always, there are footsteps, very light ones, very fast. The gait of someone who has somewhere to be and loves that this is so. They have been on the world's roads since a baby climbed out of a basket in a cave and walked to the door to look at the light. They do not stop. They never once, in the whole long story, stopped, and they pass, every night, close by you, because the Greeks were right about the last thing, the thing they knew each evening when they tipped the final cup of wine out for him before bed. Sleep is a journey. You are lying still, and you are also, already, leaving, over the border where the day ends, into the country where the dreams get delivered, and you will cross back at first light. Rested, expected, safe. It is the gentlest crossing there is, and you have made it thousands of times. And you have never once made it alone. Whatever the empty room says, travel is his department. It has always been his department. The door you are drifting toward right now, warm and heavy and half open, is the oldest door he keeps. So let the day set itself down. It is finished, and it was carried, and everything that needed delivering has been delivered. He is out there still, on the road between the last thing and the next, moving the way he has always moved, lightly, toward morning. You can sleep now. He knows the way.